Welcome, wanderer. You have arrived, whether by chance, longing, or quiet curiosity. Your path has brought you here to a still place between moments. This is the empty boat, not a destination, but a pause. Not a lesson, but a gentle breath in. A world that rushes. Here we drift. We do not chase after answers, we sit with questions. We do not fill the silence, we listen to it. The Buddha once said, "As a bee gathers nectar and moves on without harming the flower, so should the wise move through the world." Here we gather only what is light, soft, healing. No doctrine to follow, no belief to cling to, only stories. Stories like drops of dew, fragile, fleeting, yet reflecting the whole sky. Each tale you are about to hear is a doorway, a whisper from the forest, a ripple across still water, a quiet friend for your anxious heart. There are 25 of them, each born from ancient Zen, Theravada clarity, and Mahayana compassion woven together with the thread of modern tenderness. They will guide you through letting go, sitting with sorrow, finding beauty in the ordinary, and remembering who you are beneath all that noise. Let this space be your boat. Let go of the shore, and trust the silence to carry you now. Breathe in gently, and let us begin the first story. The bamboo gate, a story of surrender, and the wind that waits. Story 1. The bamboo gate. There was once a small monastery built into the side of a mist-covered mountain. Hidden behind tall pine trees and soft-spoken winds, it had no gates, no signs, no visitors. The monks who lived there rose before dawn, walked barefoot in the garden, and bowed to the sound of a wooden bell carved from a dead cypress. Among them was an old abbot named Tenzin, whose voice was so calm it felt like water sliding over stone. Below the monastery lay a small place of farmers, potters, and weavers. From that village came a man named Daisuk. Daisuk had lived most of his life chasing control. He ran a successful carpentry business, paid his taxes on time, controlled his temper, monitored his calories, and scheduled every part of his day to the minute. Yet despite all that order, his nights were sleepless. He dreamed of being swallowed by rivers, of clocks spinning backwards, of hands that couldn't grasp dot. So one day, unannounced, Daisuke closed his workshop and climbed the mountain. He had heard of the monastery and its peace, its quietness, its lack of schedule, and he hated all of it. But something in his soul, restless and fraying, needed it more than he wanted to admit. At the base of the monastery stood a bamboo gate. It was not locked. In fact, it was so light that the wind could swing it gently on its wooden hinge. But Daisuke stood in front of it, arms crossed, eyes scanning the open courtyard. There was no guard, no welcoming monk, no schedule, no sign of order. After waiting a moment, he called out, "I've come to learn." No answer. He stepped inside the gate and stood, unsure. The wind brushed past him. He looked around, tense. No one greeted him. No one asked his name or intentions. He knocked on a wooden post with impatience. Minutes passed. Finally, an old monk appeared, sweeping fallen petals from the courtyard stone. He did not look up. I said, "I've come to learn," Daisuke repeated. Louder, the monk nodded slowly but said nothing. "I've left everything. My business, my home. I need peace," Daisuke added, his voice tightening. The monk stopped sweeping, looked up, and smiled softly. "Then sit, watch the gate." And then he walked away. For the rest of the day, Daisuke sat beside the bamboo gate, waiting. He waited for instructions. for a lesson, for something to begin, but nothing came. The gate creaked. Birds flew overhead. The wind carried the scent of pine. The sun sank behind the mountains. No one returned. That night, Daisk sat awake on the cold stone, his jaw clenched. The next morning, Tenzin, the abbot, finally appeared. "I came to study Zen," Daisk blurted out. "I want to learn how to control my thoughts, to master peace, to become empty. You've kept me waiting without purpose." Tenzin looked at him carefully. "So you've come to control even your emptiness?" Daisk was silent. Tenzin pointed to the bamboo gate. "Watch it. That is your first teaching. But it's just a gate, and yet it lets in the wind." That evening, Daisk watched the gate as instructed. He noted when it opened slightly, then closed. He tried to predict when the wind would come. He watched the rhythm, but it never followed a pattern. Just when he thought it would remain shut, moved when he expected it to swing open, it stayed still. It creaked softly, swayed lightly, moved with nothing he could control. Days passed, still no formal lesson, just the bamboo gate. His thoughts shouted at him, "What am I doing here? I could be back at the shop. Nothing's happening. This is wasting time. I must understand it." One morning, frustrated beyond measure, he stormed to Tenzin and shouted, "Is this some joke? A gate swinging in the wind. This is not teaching. This is torture." Tenzin nodded. "Indeed," he said, "because you still want to master life the way you mastered your schedule. You do not wish to be with life. You wish to pin it down. That is not peace. That is war disguised as discipline." He walked away, leaving Daisuk trembling in shame. But something shifted in him. That night, Daisuk returned to the gate, not as a student, not as a controller, but as a man exhausted from trying. He sat. He breathed. He stopped watching the gate with expectation. He stopped trying to understand. He just sat. The wind came. It passed. The gate creaked. So did something inside him. Zen parable. The master and the flagé monk once asked his master, "Master, the flag is moving. Does that mean the wind moves or the flag moves?" The master replied, "Neither. It is your mind that moves." Philosophical commentary. The bamboo gate in the story is not merely a physical object. It is a mirror. It reflects the storm that churns in Daisok's mind. His desperate need to impose order on a chaotic world is not uncommon. Many of us spend our days trying to lock down outcomes, to predict every possibility, to manage every risk. But Zen does not offer control. Zen offers intimacy. Intimacy with what is, without needing to reshape it. The bamboo gate opens and closes without instruction, just like our thoughts, emotions, and the events around us. To be at peace is not to still the wind, but to sit while it moves. Tenzin knew that until Daisuk gave up his obsession with control, no real learning could begin. The true teaching was not hidden, it was creaking gently before him, waiting for him to stop trying to master it. Psychological reflection. Modern anxiety often stems from our over-identification with control. We believe that if we can manage every part of our environment, our schedules, relationships, work, even our inner thoughts, we can finally be safe. But this is a myth. The pursuit of control often masks our fear of the unknown. In Daisok's case, his orderliness was not perception, was panic wearing a tidy shirt. Many people experience this today. Perfectionism as a shield, planning as armor, analysis as avoidance. Real peace begins when we release the illusion that we must control everything. The body begins to soften, the mind opens. We begin to feel, rather than fix. And in that moment, something deeper arises. Presence, meditative closing. You too may have a bamboo gate, something in your life that creaks unpredictably, something you cannot predict, force, or schedule. Can you sit beside it without controlling it? Can you let the wind pass without fearing its direction? Tonight, before sleep, find stillness. Breathe deeply. Visualize the bamboo gate swinging gently. In the wind, let it move, and let yourself not know, as the Buddha taught. Let go of what is gone. Let go of what may come. Let go of what is happening now. Don't try to figure anything out. Don't try to make anything happen. Rest. Right now, rest. You are not here to master the wind. You are here to remember that you are the sky. It moves through. Let the gate creak. Let the wind dance. And let yourself be. Story 2. A cup already full. It began with tea. In a quiet village, nestled between cedar hills and rice fields, there lived a scholar named Haruki. He was well respected, widely read, and known for his precision in language and thought. His home was lined with shelves, books of logic, scriptures, commentaries, and manuals of discipline. He had debated monks, corrected teachers, and written essays that were studied in distant provinces. But despite his reputation, Haruki felt an emptiness. At night, after the candles were extinguished, he lay awake, wondering why his mind, so sharp, could not find peace, why his thoughts, so ordered, brought him no rest. He had answers for everything except for the ache in his chest. One morning, a letter arrived from an old friend. There is a master who lives in the North Mountains, it read. They say his words carry silence. Go. Haruki hesitated. He had read every sutra, argued every point. What could a mountain hermit teach him that the scriptures had not? Still, the ache remained. And so, packing a few scrolls and his calligraphy brush, Haruki journeyed north. The road was long, winding through bamboo forests and narrow passes. After 3 days, he reached a modest temple built of stone and moss. A paper lantern swayed. Outside the door, the air smelled of sandalwood and earth. An old monk greeted him, bowing gently. Haruki returned the gesture with a nod and introduced himself. I am Haruki, student of philosophy and Buddhist commentary. I seek an audience with Master Riku. The monk said nothing but gestured for him to sit under the veranda. Birds chirped. In the distance, wind rustled the trees. Eventually, a barefoot figure in a simple robe approached. His face was lined, but his eyes held a youthful clarity. He sat across from Haruki without a word. You must be Master Riku, Haruki said. It is an honor. The master smiled faintly and poured tea into 2 cups. I've studied for decades, Haruki began, Theravada and Mahayana scriptures, Yug, Chira, Madhyamaka, Vinaya Abhidhamma. The master set the teapot down, but continued pouring. Haruk. I paused. The tea had already filled his cup, and now it spilled over the sides, dripping onto the table. Soaking his sleeve, Master Haruki said quickly, the cup is full. No more can go in. The master stopped pouring and looked at him gently. Exactly, he said. Haruki stared at the cup, stunned. You come, the master said softly, with your cup already full. How can I pour anything into it? The words fell like a stone into a still pond. For a moment, there was only silence between them. Then Haruki bowed his head, humbled. I see, he whispered. I came not to learn, but to confirm what I already believe. The master nodded. Double quotes, the mind that knows cannot listen. The mind that empties receives. Zen parable, Nonin, and the overflowing tea famous. Zen story tells of a professor who came to visit the Japanese master Nonin to learn about Zen. Nonin served tea. He poured until the cup was full, then kept pouring. The professor watched the tea overflow. It is full, he said. Nonin replied, like this cup, you are full of your own opinions and speculations. How can I show you Zen unless you first empty your cup? Philosophical commentary. The image of the overflowing tea is deceptively simple, yet it holds one of Zen's core teachings. In the West, we often equate knowledge with accumulation. We stack information, facts, theories, believing that the more we know, the wiser we become. But Zen reverses this logic. In Zen, the path to wisdom is subtraction, not addition. To truly learn, one must learn to truly see. One must remove the filters that distort the view. Haruki's journey is not that of a novice seeking knowledge. It is of a master in disguise and willing to admit that intellect alone cannot quiet the suffering heart. His mistake is common, believing that spiritual understanding is something to be conquered, catalogued, or proven. But Zen cannot be grasped, can only be experienced. Like tea, it must be sipped with humility. And like a cup, the mind must first be empty to receive it. Psychological reflection in modern times. We carry our own version of a full cup. It may not be doctrine or philosophy, but it is full, nonetheless, of opinions, judgments, plans, fears, unresolved narratives, and noise. We arrive at relationships with assumptions. We enter conversations with conclusions already formed. We consume information not to change our minds, but to reinforce what we already think. This state is called cognitive closure, the psychological need for certainty. It gives temporary relief, but prevents deeper understanding. Anxiety thrives in a mind that demands answers and control. Healing begins when we dare to pause, to release, to not dash, no dot, to empty the cup. This doesn't mean forgetting everything. It means loosening our grip on what we believe must be true, to allow space for what might actually be. Meditative closing tonight. Ask yourself, what fills your cup? What stories do you tell yourself about who you are, what others are, what the world should be? Are you willing just for a breath, just for a moment, to set those stories down? Find a quiet space. Sit comfortably. Close your eyes and visualize a small teacup resting in your palm. Feel its weight. Feel the warmth. Now imagine pouring from it not tea, but your beliefs, your expectations, your judgments. Watch as they overflow. Let them go. Feel the cup grow light and empty. The Buddha said, "Those who cling to views wander the world, offending people. Those who have no fixed views find peace." Let your cup be empty. Let your mind be quiet. In that stillness, something new may enter uninvited, unplanned, unexplainable, and healing. This is not forgetting, it is remembering how to be present. Drink deeply and begin again. Story 3. The Empty Tea House. There was a path in the hills of Kyoto that twisted gently through maple groves and sloping stone. Along this path, travelers often passed a small wooden structure nestled among moss-covered rocks. It had no sign, no lantern, and no keeper at the door. Only a single stone step and a faded blue curtain fluttering softly in the wind. Locals called it the empty tea house for years. People walked past it, sometimes pausing to peek inside, sometimes pausing only to rest. Inside there was nothing, no tables, no kettle, no cups. Just smooth wooden floors, a single cushion, and a low window that framed the forest beyond like a painting in stillness. No one owned it, no one claimed it, and yet it was always open. The story of the tea house had long passed into rumor and wonder. Some said it had once been a real tea house, run by a retired monk who brewed tea for weary travelers and asked no coin in return. Others said it had never served tea at all, that its only offering was silence. One rainy afternoon, a young woman named Amy arrived at the hill's bend. She had not come for the tea house. She was walking without destination, as one sometimes does when their heart carries too much. Amy had just left her job, a job she had worked at for 5 years, a job with polite meetings, quarterly reports, promotions that meant little, and praise that echoed hollow. She had spent the past 6 months working late into the night, waking early, replying to emails with carefully chosen words. And then, one morning, she simply stopped. She rose, looked in the mirror, and did not recognize the eyes staring back. Something inside her had become brittle, and then it snapped. She packed a few things, told no one, and began walking. It wasn't escape. It wasn't even courage. It was surrender, the kind born not from weakness, but from exhaustion. When EMI saw the tea house, it was mostly by chance. She stepped inside, brushing rain from her coat, and sat on the lone cushion. Her breath came softly, the window framed. The misty forest, droplets tracing lines down its edges. She waited. Perhaps someone would come. Perhaps a monk would appear with tea, but no one came. Nothing moved except the leaves outside and the occasional drip from the eaves. She sat. 10 minutes, 20, a full hour, and for the first time in months, EMI did not check her phone. She did not think about resumes or apartment rent or what she would say to her manager. She did not plan the next step. She simply sat. The emptiness of the tea house began to do something, not with sound, not with words, but with space. It made room inside her, a room she hadn't entered in years, a room uncluttered by tasks, unlit by screens, unmeasured by goals, a still room. She breathed, and for the first time it felt like enough. That night, EMI stayed in a nearby guest house. The next day, she returned to the tea house, and the day after, that she brought no books, no journal, no questions, only herself and silence. Zen parable, the master's empty room. Student once asked his master, "What is enlightenment?" The master led him to a bare room, completely empty. "This," he said. The student looked around. "But there's nothing here." The master replied, "Exactly, nothing, and not even the need for something." Philosophical commentary. Empty tea house is not a place, is a metaphor for the inner life we've abandoned. In modern existence, every space we enter demands something from us. Rooms are filled with noise, with duties, with agendas. Even leisure is structured. Even relaxation becomes another item to schedule. But emptiness has its own sacredness. Zen teaches not the fullness of life, but its clarity. Emptiness is not void, it is potential. It is openness without demand. It is the absence of noise that makes room for truth. In the story, EMI does not enter the tea house looking for answers. And so, She becomes ready to receive something deeper than answers. She receives space, and that space begins to soften her, because silence, when met with surrender, becomes medicine. Psychological reflection: our minds are crowded houses. Thought after thought, layered over years of conditioning, trauma, performance, and anxiety. We wake with alerts. We eat with background noise. We scroll through meals, work through exhaustion, and fall asleep, not in rest, but in collapse, in psychology. This overexposure to stimulation without pause leads to a state called cognitive overload. The nervous system is perpetually in motion. The inner voice becomes drowned beneath the volume. Without silence, there is no integration. My single quotes as moment in the tea house represents a rare and radical act. The decision to do nothing. No analysis, no journaling, no goal for healing, just presence in. Clinical studies: even 10 minutes of quiet sitting daily can decrease cortisol, increase alpha brainwaves, and improve emotional regulation. But more than data, it gives us something intangible: the feeling of coming home to ourselves. We must learn again how to sit in empty rooms and not fear them. Meditative closing: where is your tea house? Is there a corner in your day, 10 minutes, 5 even, where you allow nothingness? No stimulation, no scrolling, no seeking. Just breath and being. Tonight, turn off the lights, sit on your bed or on the floor, close your eyes. Listen not for words, but for what remains when words fall away. Do not wait for insight. Do not hunt peace. Let the silence be enough. And if your thoughts return, gently bow to them, then return to the stillness. Again, the Buddha said, if you are quiet enough, you will hear the flow of the universe. You will feel its rhythm. Go with this flow. Happiness lies ahead. Return to the teahouse. Return to that quiet space within you that needs no renovation, no validation, no approval. It is already complete, empty, and full of peace. Story 4. The monk who planted silence. The valley of Sojourn was quiet in spring. Plum blossoms floated on the surface of narrow rivers, and farmers walked barefoot through rice paddies with straw hats shading their eyes. In this quiet valley stood a weathered monastery carved into the hillside, where birds nested under roof tiles and moss crept between every stone. Here lived a monk named Uto. Uto was not known for eloquent lectures or deep philosophical arguments. He was not consulted on scriptures, nor did he write elegant calligraphy like his peers. In fact, many novices wondered why he had remained at the monastery for so long without being promoted to teach or guide. All Uto did was tend the garden. Every morning, while the others chanted or debated, Uto took a straw broom and swept the earth. He trimmed hedges, he moved stones, he watered with care so deliberate it felt like a prayer. Some days he would simply kneel beside a seedling and sit with it, as if listening. One day, a young novice named Ren approached the abbot with frustration. "Master," Ren said, "I have memorized the Heart Sutra. I have studied the Four Noble Truths. I sit in meditation for hours. But still, my thoughts race and my heart is not at peace." The abbot looked at him kindly. "Then perhaps it is time you studied." Under Uto, Ren blinked. "But he doesn't speak. He doesn't even teach." "Precisely," the abbot said. "Follow him for a month. Do not question, just observe." The next morning, Ren met Uto in the garden. Uto nodded and handed him a rake. They began their work in silence. For the first few days, Ren was impatient. The tasks felt menial. Pulling weeds, moving stones, scooping compost. He felt his mind churn with commentary. This is pointless. I'm wasting time. Why won't he say anything? But Uto said nothing. He moved slowly, precisely, placing each foot with attention. He never rushed, never sighed, never looked at the sun to measure time. By the second week, Ren began to notice things: how Uto crouched when trimming a hedge so as not to block the light, how he moved his hands to avoid disturbing a sleeping butterfly, how he paused before watering as if greeting the plant. There was a rhythm to Uto's silence, a quiet that wasn't empty but full, and without knowing why. Ren's breathing began to slow. One afternoon, while they were pruning a plum tree, Ren spoke. "Why don't you talk?" Uto looked up, smiled, and touched his lips gently, then pointed to the tree. Ren waited. Why, Uto placed a hand on the trunk, then leaned close, listening. After a moment, he whispered, "She's already speaking." Ren furrowed his brow. "The tree," Uto nodded. "So is the wind, and the earth, and the stone beneath your knee." Ren was quiet. He knelt and placed his palm against the bark. The breeze moved gently through the branches. A few petals fell, and in that moment Ren did not feel the need to say anything. For the first time in his life, he was simply present. Zen parable. The sound of one hand. A student came to his master with a question. "Master, what is the sound of one hand clapping?" The master replied, "Return to the garden, work, listen." Months passed. The student worked, listened, watched leaves fall, rivers run, ants crawl. One day, the sound was no longer a riddle. It was everything. Philosophical commentary in Zen. Silence is not a void to be filled, is the field where truth grows. Modern minds are conditioned to seek meaning through words, explanations, doctrines, but Zen teaches through subtraction, not addition. It does not demand understanding. It invites you into unknowing. Uto, the monk, does not teach with words because he does not need to. His every motion is a sermon. His garden is a scripture written in breath, movement, and intention. To plant silence is to cultivate the conditions for wisdom, not by forcing thought, but by stilling the water so the moon can reflect. We are always listening to noise, but true listening begins when we can hear what has no name. Psychological reflection in psychology. The mind's constant narration is known as the default mode network, a background system that loops thoughts about self, time, and judgment. While necessary for some tasks, this mental chatter also fuels anxiety, rumination, and disconnection. Silence, in therapeutic contexts, is not emptiness. It is space, space where the nervous system can reset. Space where emotions can arise without being rushed into explanation. Uto's garden represents a state of mindful presence, not mindful as a technique, but as a way of being. His silence is not awkward, it is sacred. He models attunement, being fully with what is, without needing to label or fix it. For many in today's world, healing begins not with talking but with sitting, with watching water boil, hands move, leaves fall, with allowing the inner noise to soften without fear. Meditative closing. Where in your life can you plant silence? Is there a moment today, 5 minutes, perhaps, when you can do something slowly, without words? Maybe wash a dish, fold a blanket, walk a quiet path. But this time, without music, without narration, without thought of doing it right. Just movement, just breath, just presence. Let silence be the soil. The Buddha said, Silence is the language of the wise. All else is poor translation. Return to the garden. Return to that part of you that needs no explanation. Let your hands move slowly. Let your breath come gently. And let the stillness inside you bloom. Story 5. The cloud that forgot it was watered. The sky over Lake Osamu was an endless sheet of grey. On days when the mist was thick and the wind barely moved, the lake became a mirror, reflecting the clouds so perfectly it was impossible to tell where water ended and sky began. On such a day, a boy named Kato sat alone by the edge of the lake. His feet dangled just above the still surface, his breath fogging gently in the cool air. Behind him, the village stirred with life shops opening, vendors calling out, children rushing to school. But Kato sat still, his eyes unfocused. He had failed again, for the third time in a row. He had not passed the entrance exam to the city university. His father, a fisherman hardened by salt and silence, had said nothing when the results arrived. His mother had smiled too brightly, as if pretending not to notice the sorrow behind his eyes. But inside, Kato felt small, defeated, useless. "I'm nothing," he whispered to the water. Then he picked up a small rock and threw it far into the lake. It disappeared without a sound. Only a faint ripple remained, an old man sitting beneath. A tree behind him let out a quiet chuckle. "You speak to water like it understands," the man said. Startled, Kato turned. The old man wore faded robes and a straw hat that covered most of his face. His hands rested on a wooden staff, polished smooth by time. "I didn't know anyone was there," Kato muttered. "Few do," the old man replied. "They only see what they expect." Kato said nothing. He wasn't in the mood for riddles. The man stood slowly and walked toward the lake, his steps barely disturbing the fallen leaves. "Why do you believe you are nothing?" he asked. Kato hesitated. "Because I've tried and failed. Again and again. I can't make my parents proud. I can't make myself proud. I've lost count of how many people have passed me by." The old man nodded. "Then perhaps," he said, "you are like the cloud." Kato frowned. "What cloud?" The man pointed up. A single shape drifted overhead, its edges blurring into the sky. "There once was a cloud," he began, "who believed it had no worth. It had floated for so long, changing form again and again, now a rabbit, now a sword, now a face no one could name. People looked up, made jokes, passed time, but no one ever thanked the cloud. No one called it beautiful once it dissolved." Kato watched the cloud drift slowly across the lake's reflection. One day, the man continued, the cloud saw a mountain. It envied the mountain its strength, its stillness, its place in the world. "I am only air and vapor," the cloud thought. "I will never be solid, never be useful." So it gathered all its weight and fell as rain. He paused, letting the breeze pass. The rain soaked into the earth, fed the roots of a tree. The tree bore fruit. A traveler plucked that fruit and shared it with a child. The child grew strong. Years later, that child became a healer who saved many lives. The old man turned to Kato, but the cloud never knew. Kato's eyes had softened, so the cloud wasn't worthless. "No," the man said, smiling, "but it forgot. It was water." Kato looked down at the lake again. The surface shimmered, disturbed only by the wind and his breath. "I don't know what I am," he said quietly. "You don't need to," the man replied. "You only need to be what you are completely." Zen parable. The moon and the watery monk once asked his master, What is the self? The master pointed to a well and said, "Look." The monk peered into the water and saw the moon reflected. "It's beautiful," the monk whispered. "Yes," the master replied. "But do not confuse the reflection for the sky." Philosophical commentary: the cloud's forgetting is our forgetting. We are not what we appear to be: roles, grades, jobs, labels. We are the water beneath all of that. But we become attached to the forms we take: the student, the success, the failure, the disappointment. Zen invites us to go deeper. Just as the cloud changes shape, just as the water flows, so too does the self shift and move. We are not failures when we fall. We are not worth more when we rise. We are the process itself, the breath, the effort, the awareness that moves through all things. To remember our nature is not to achieve anything. It is to stop clinging to what we are not. Cato's lesson is not one of ambition, it is one of presence, of identity that does not depend on outcome. He is water, and so are you. Psychological reflection: modern society teaches us to measure identity through performance. Fail an exam, you are a failure. Lose a job, you are unworthy. Be single, you are unloved. These equations are deeply harmful. They reduce the self to a transaction, a result, a number. But the human psyche is not fixed. Cognitive behavioral therapy speaks of the core beliefs we form, often shaped by repeated experiences or internalized voices. One failure becomes a defining story. One rejection becomes a truth. Healing begins when we challenge those stories. When we remember that thoughts are not facts, that clouds are not permanent, and that our value is not tied to what others see. When Cato let go of the outcome, he began to soften. His breath slowed, his shoulders dropped. He no longer demanded identity from the world. He began to simply be, and from that state change is possible, because water, though soft, shapes mountains. Meditative closing: close your eyes, breathe gently. Imagine a single cloud drifting through a wide sky. It changes form now, a bird now, a tree now, a hand reaching toward. Nothing, it dissolves, and yet it remains now. Imagine that cloud becoming rain, falling, disappearing into earth, but still present, still water. Let go of the form you think you must hold. Let yourself fall into presence, into trust, into now. The Buddha said, just as a solid rock is not shaken by the storm, even so the wise are not affected by praise or blame. Be the water beneath all change. You are not what others see. You are not what you fear. You are not your failures or your victories. You are the sky, and the cloud, and the rain, and the silence beneath it all. Return to that, remember. Story 6. The wind does not ask for direction. The desert plains of Genzai were not a place many people sought during the summer season. The sun was fierce, and the wind blew hot dust across the endless sea of ochre sand. But if you looked closely, beyond the dunes and the trembling heat, there was a narrow path of polished stone leading to a weather-beaten hut, shaded by a single crooked tree. Inside that hut lived an old woman named Saya. She had once been a dancer in the city, her name known in courtyards and banquet halls. But that was long ago, before war came, before loss cracked her life open and scattered the pieces to the wind. She had left everything and wandered for years until she settled in the quiet vastness of the desert, where nothing clung to anything. Days were simple. She woke with the sun, swept the floor, lit incense, and walked barefoot to a spring 2 miles away. In the afternoons, she listened to the wind, and in the evenings, she watched the sky change color without ever asking why. One morning, just as the horizon turned gold, a man arrived at her door. His face was worn, his clothes formal but frayed. He carried a satchel of notebooks and a phone he kept checking even in the middle of the dust. Saya opened the door and studied him silently. "Are you the one they call the desert monk?" he asked. "I'm not a monk," she said. "But they say you understand things. They say you've found peace." "I've forgotten things," she replied, stepping aside. "That's not quite the same." The man hesitated before entering. He looked around the bare room. No clock, no calendar, no bookshelves, no mirror. Just a mat, a small table, a teapot, and the breeze filtering through the open window. "My name is Kenji," he said. "I'm between lives, I think. My wife left last year. My job a few months ago. And my father passed away last week. He was the last person I was trying to please." Saya nodded but said nothing. She poured tea. "I don't know what to do," he said. "I had a plan. Everything made sense, even when it hurt. But now, ... Nothing." She handed him the cup and sat. "Do you hear that?" she asked. Kenji listened. "Only the wind." "It never stops," he said. "No," she said, "and it never asks where it's going." He frowned. "What do you mean?" Saya leaned back, her spine upright like a tree. "The wind doesn't demand. It doesn't choose a destination or resist the curve of the dunes. It moves. That's enough." Kenji looked at her, uncertain. "But we're not wind." "No," she said softly. "We're the ones who suffer because we forget how to move without needing to arrive." He sipped the tea, still confused, but a quiet part of him stirred. That night, he slept on the floor beside the open window. The wind curled around him. It spoke in whispers he could not name, but he didn't push it away. He stayed for 3 days. Each day, Saya said little. She offered him simple tasks, gathering firewood, carrying water, sweeping sand from the floor, even though it returned each night. She did not ask him to meditate or speak of his grief. She simply let him move. By the 4th day, he stopped. Checking his phone by the 5th, he cried beside the spring, not because he found the answer, but because he stopped needing one. Zen parable. The traveler and the winder traveler once asked a Zen master, "Where should I go to find peace?" The master stood, pointed to the trees shaking in the breeze, and said, "Wherever the wind takes, you'll go without asking." The traveler said, "But I fear I will be lost." The master smiled. "Only those who cling to maps forget how to feel their way home." Philosophical commentary in Zen. Direction is not about destination. It is about flow. The modern mind is addicted to maps, plans, schedules, 5-year visions. While there is wisdom in preparation, there is suffering in attachment. When life changes course through divorce, loss, illness, failure, we panic because the map no longer makes sense, but Zen points elsewhere. It asks, can you trust movement itself? The wind is not chaotic. It is free. It teaches the art of surrender, not as giving up, but as giving in to the rhythm of impermanence. Saya embodies this principle. She has stopped trying to explain. She lives in presence. She honors the wind's nature by living in rhythm, not resistance. And through that, she teaches Kenji without teaching. She simply allows. Psychological reflection and certainty is among the greatest sources of modern anxiety. We are taught that stability equals safety, but true psychological safety does not come from predicting the future. It comes from confidence in our capacity to respond. Therapy often involves helping people grieve the loss of control, not by regaining it, but by redefining their relationship to unpredictability. Kenji's paralysis is not unique. After multiple losses, he no longer trusts the ground beneath him. His sense of self was tied to people, roles, outcomes. Without them, he flails. But in learning to sit with stillness, to move without answers, he begins to rebuild a different sense of self, one that is not rigid, one that can bend with the wind. This flexibility is resilience. It is not strength that resists. It is softness that adapts. Meditative closing. Ask yourself, where in your life are you holding tightly to a map that no longer serves you? Is there a plan you've outgrown? A vision that has collapsed? A self-image built on things now gone? Tonight, step outside, feel the wind, even if faint. Close your eyes, breathe with it, let go of direction for a moment. Feel what it's like to move without needing to know. The Buddha said, let go of the past, let go of the future, let go of the present. With a heart that is free, go beyond time. You are not the map, you are not the road, you are the wind. Let yourself move, let yourself be. Story 7. The fisherman's lamp. The coastline of Hanami stretched in a gentle curve, where waves licked the rocks like an old memory returning again and again. At night, the sky seemed to fold itself over the sea, and lanterns swayed on boats that bobbed in rhythm with the tide. In one weathered hut at the end of a narrow dock, a fisherman named Jiro lived alone. Jiro had spent his life at sea. His hands were hard and gnarled, his face carved by salt and wind. People in the nearby village often spoke of his solitude, how he never married, never joined in festivals, and rarely smiled. Children said he could talk to whales. Elders said he had once been in love, but lost everything in a storm. None of it was quite true, but none of it was false either. Jiro did speak, but only when necessary. And he did love deeply, though quietly. But the sea had taken more from him than most, and so he gave himself to its silence. He fished at dawn, mended nets in the afternoon and at night, sat beside an old brass lamp that once belonged to his father. He never lit it with electricity, though a bulb had been added later. Instead, he filled it with oil and struck the flame himself, as if honoring some invisible ritual. The lamp was not for light, it was for memory. One evening, as the wind howled, louder than usual, a knock came at the door. It was a young man, soaked from rain, shivering. "I'm sorry," the stranger said. "My motorbike broke down near the cliffs. I saw the light from your dock. May I come in for a while?" Jiro nodded and stepped aside. The man introduced himself as Takao, a university student hiking coastal trails for a photography project. He had a tired voice, polite manner, and a camera wrapped in cloth to protect it from the storm. Jiro handed him a towel, then sat back by the lamp without saying much. The fire inside flickered gently. Takao watched him, curious. "You live here alone?" Jiro nodded. Double quotes, "Do you ever get lonely?" Jiro thought for a moment. "No," he said. "I get quiet." Takao smiled, unsure whether it was a joke or something. Deeper later that evening, the two shared tea and rice. The storm roared beyond the windows, but inside, the room was still. Takao looked at the lamp. "It's beautiful," he said, "but a little dim. It doesn't need to be bright." Jiro replied, only steady. Taco studied the flame. My mind doesn't feel steady these days, he admitted. There's so much noise, future, career, opinions, fears. It's like a storm, even when it's quiet outside. Jiro glanced at the lamp. I know storms, he said. I've been through many, some out there, he gestured to the sea, some in here, he tapped his chest. Taco leaned in, listening. Years ago, Jiro said slowly, I lost my brother. We were fishing together. A sudden current overturned our boat. I survived. He did not. There was no emotion in his voice, but the silence afterward spoke everything. I stopped speaking for a year. I stopped fishing. I stopped eating with others, but each night I lit this lamp. Taco swallowed. Why? Jiro looked at the flame. Because grief is like the ocean. It's too vast to cross all at once. But if you light something small each night, you don't get lost. The room grew quiet. Takayo leaned back, his breath softer now. I wish someone had told me that, he said. My father passed away last spring. I've been running ever since. Jiro didn't respond. He reached forward and adjusted the flame slightly. Then he said, sit with it. Don't rush. The storm will pass, but the sea will always be there. You have to learn how to float. Zen parable, the lamp in the cave disciple, asked the master, how can I dispel darkness from my mind? The master replied, do not fight. The darkness, light a lamp and sit with it. The disciple frowned, but the darkness feels endless. The master smiled. A single flame is enough when you stop trying to chase the sun. Philosophical commentary. Jiro's lamp is not merely a source of light, is a symbol of stillness, memory, and quiet presence. In Zen, there is no rush to escape darkness. There is no striving to overcome. Instead, there is deep, patient witnessing. We live in a culture that fears sadness, that flees loss. Grief is treated like a disease to be cured, rather than a tide to be lived through. But Zen offers another way. It says, sit light, your small lamp. Let the grief speak. Let the night come. You are not required to understand it. You are only required to stay with it. The steady flame does not burn away the storm. It simply tells you that you are still here. Psychological reflection. Grief is non-linear in psychology. We speak of the 5 stages of grief, but this can be misleading. Human sorrow does not move in tidy lines. It loops, it returns, it surprises. Taco, like many, was trying to outrun his sadness. He buried it beneath movement, ambition, distraction. But buried grief does not die. It becomes restlessness, irritability, anxiety. It spills out in unexpected ways. Jiro's approach is quiet, but deeply therapeutic. He does not analyze. He does not offer platitudes. He simply models steadiness. He lights the lamp. He lets the night come, and he remains. This form of presence, what therapists call co-regulation, one of the most healing forces available to the human nervous system. To sit with another without needing to fix them. To let them feel without interruption. In such spaces, we remember how to float, even in sorrow, especially in sorrow. Meditative closing tonight. As the light fades, ask yourself, what storm lives inside you? Is there a sorrow you've been rushing past? Sit quietly, light a candle if you can. Do not try to understand your pain. Do not try to name it, solve it, justify it. Just sit with it, watch the flame. Let your breath slow. Let the sorrow rest beside you without fear. The Buddha said, do not dwell in the past. Do not dream of the future. Concentrate the mind on the present moment. This moment is enough. You are not required to heal all at once. You are only asked to remain, to be steady, to stay lit. The storm will pass, and you will still be here. Story 8. The Pebble in the Master's Chute was a quiet morning at the Ryoku Temple, nestled deep in the cedar hills, where birds sang as if reciting ancient prayers, and the mist moved slowly over moss-covered stones. The monks were already at work, sweeping paths, boiling rice, gathering water from the spring. Silence was a part of everything, not imposed but grown, like vines winding gently around the breath. Among the novices was a boy named Aoki, barely 17, whose eyes held a constant restlessness. He had come to the monastery 6 months ago, not from spiritual longing, but to escape the world. After a violent quarrel with his father, a broken friendship, and a deep shame that clung to him like a second skin, Aoki had decided to disappear, here in this world of silence and simplicity. He had hoped to outrun what lived inside him, but nothing stayed buried for long. Each day he followed the rituals. Each night he lay awake. Though his body moved through the forms of meditation, something inside resisted. Anger flickered beneath. The surface irrational, hot and constant. He would feel it when another novice misstepped during chanting. He would feel it when the rice was too dry. He would feel it most of all when Master Genjo, the temple's abbot, spoke in his soft voice about compassion. One morning, after a particularly restless meditation session, Aoki snapped. "This is pointless," he muttered aloud. "I don't feel anything. Everyone sits like statues and pretends to be peaceful." Several novices turned toward him, wide-eyed. Master Genjo, seated calmly on a cushion near the altar, opened his eyes and looked at him gently. "You are disturbed," the master said. "I'm angry," Aoki replied, "and I don't know why." Genjo nodded slowly. "Then we must find the cause," he said. "Come with me." They walked together through the temple garden, past lotus ponds and weathered lanterns, until they reached the master's small hut. Inside, Genjo opened a wooden drawer and took out a single, smooth pebble. "Place this in your shoe," he said, handing it to Aoki. The boy blinked. "What?" "Put the pebble in your left shoe and go about your day as usual. Do not remove it." Aoki frowned, but obeyed. The pebble was small but sharp. As he swept the courtyard, its presence grew more noticeable. With each step, it pressed against the ball of his foot. By noon, it had begun to sting. By evening, it was all he could think about. That night, during sitting meditation, he could barely concentrate. Every inhale was broken by discomfort, every silence filled with irritation. The next morning, when he met Master Genjo again, he was scowling. "This is ridiculous," he said. "The pebble is driving me mad." Genjo only said, Another day passed. Then two, by the third. Aoki limped. His thoughts were consumed. He could no longer hear the birds or feel the wind. The world had shrunk to a single point of pain. That evening, he stood before Genjo again. "I can't take it anymore," he said. "May I remove it?" The master smiled softly. "Please." Aoki slipped off his sandal, took out the pebble, and breathed in relief. "It's such a small thing," he said, almost laughing, "and yet it controlled everything." Genjo looked at him. "So does anger." Zen parable, the thorn and the pathe disciple once said, "Master, my mind is full of thorns. I cannot walk in peace." The master replied, "Then stop running. Kneel down, find the thorn, remove it with care." It was never the path that hurt you. It was what you carried into it. Philosophical commentary: the pebble is not a trick. It is a teacher. In Zen, we are often asked to experience the truth in our bodies, not in theory. The pebble in Aoki's shoe represents the unnoticed irritation that shapes our perceptions, decisions, and relationships. Small, persistent, powerful. Like the pebble, our anger begins unnoticed. A comment, a memory, a gesture. We do not address it, so it settles in, and slowly it defines our steps. We become reactive, defensive, disconnected. Master Genjo does not scold Aoki. He does not quote sutras. He does not explain the psychology of repressed emotion. He allows the boy to feel the pebble directly, to understand its power not through argument, but through embodiment. This is the heart of Zen teaching, direct experience. Truth is not learned, it is touched, psychological reflection in the language. Of modern psychology, Aoki's anger is a classic case of unresolved emotional energy. It may stem from trauma, guilt, unmet expectations. Left unacknowledged, it finds expression in misdirected irritation, cynicism, and hostility. Cognitive behavioral therapy speaks of automatic thoughts, reactions that surface without conscious choice. These thoughts are shaped by underlying beliefs. Aoki likely believes he is not enough, that the world is unfair, that connection leads to pain. But instead of examining those beliefs, he suppresses them. He hides in the monastery. Yet the mind carries itself wherever the body goes. The pebble exercise is a somatic mirror. It shows him how something small, when unexamined, can dominate awareness. Healing begins when we stop blaming the world for our limp and look inside our shoe. Meditative closing tonight. Reflect on this question. What pebble do you carry? What small, sharp pain lives just beneath your daily steps? Is it a memory, a grudge, a wound left unspoken? Find a quiet space. Sit comfortably, close your eyes, visualize yourself, removing your shoe, holding that pebble in your hand. Observe it not to judge, but to understand. Let your breath become slow. Let your thoughts soften, and ask yourself, can I let this go? The Buddha said, anger is like holding a burning coal with the intent of throwing it at another. You are the one who gets burned. Do not carry pain you no longer need. Place the pebble down and walk lightly, gently toward peace. Story 9. The bell that rang itself there was a monastery built high into the side of Mount Yum, where clouds passed through the courtyards, and every morning began with the sound of a bell echoing down into the valley. No one knew exactly when the bell had been cast or who first brought it to the temple. It stood beneath a wooden arch, wrapped in vines, and prayer flags faded by wind and time. Monks came and went. The abbot grew old and passed his robes to another. Yet the bell remained it. Was said that once a year, always on the same day, the bell rang by itself, without rope, without hand, without wind. No one could explain it, and yet it was heard. Not just at the temple, but by villagers across the river, by hunters deep in the forest, by shepherds watching their herds. It was not loud, not sharp, but soft and round, like water falling onto stillness. Many believed it was a miracle. Some believed it was memory, and some, like a young monk named Toma, believed it was superstition. Toma was new to the monastery, but already gaining a reputation. He was diligent, intelligent, and sharp-tongued. He read the sutras with precision, challenged the elders during discussions, and rolled his eyes at anything that hinted of magic. One evening, Sitting under a maple tree, he turned to his teacher and said, "This story about the self-ringing bell, it's just metaphor, isn't it? A tale to stir awe in people who don't understand physics." His teacher, a monk named Shun, smiled faintly. "Does it trouble you that something may exist outside explanation?" Toma crossed his arms. "It troubles me that others accept things without proof." Shun nodded. "Then you should be the one to guard the bell this year." Toma blinked. "Guard it? The day is approaching," Shun said. "If it rings, you'll be there. If it doesn't, you'll know the truth. Stay from dawn to dusk." Toma agreed. He was certain the vigil would only confirm what he already believed. On the appointed day, he rose early and climbed the stone steps to the bell tower. The sky was grey and clear, with no storm in sight. He brought a cushion, a flask of tea, and his notebook. He sat, he watched, he waited. Morning passed into afternoon. Wind stirred the flags. Birds came and went. Toma grew bored, then agitated, then tired. He wrote observations, sketched the mechanism of the bell, checked for wires or hidden devices. Nothing by late afternoon. He leaned against the pillar, half asleep. Then, just as the light began to bend golden, the bell rang dot once, clear dot, resonant dot, not loud, but unmistakable. Toma sat upright, heart pounding. There had been no movement, no hand, no breeze strong enough to shift the massive bronze. He rushed to inspect it again. The ropes were still, the ground was firm. His own body was the only thing that had moved. It had rung, and he could not say how. That evening he returned to the temple. Shaken, he found Shun sweeping the walkway. "It rang," Toma said. Shun did not look surprised. "I saw no one," Toma continued. "There was no wind. I don't understand." Shun placed the broom aside. Would it help to understand? Toma frowned. "Of course." Shun sat on the steps. "There are things in this world that arise when the conditions are right. Not by force, not by calculation. Just as a plum blossoms without being told to, just as a bird sings without knowing why. The bell is not magic, it is presence." Toma sat beside him, quieter now. "I've spent so much time trying to know," he murmured, "to explain, to dissect." Shun nodded. "That too is a kind of bell. It rings loudly, constantly." Toma turned to him. "But what made the bell ring?" Shun looked toward the mountains, where the last light was slipping between the trees. "Perhaps it was ready," he said. "Perhaps you were." Zen parable. The sound of the bell. A student asked, "When will I awaken?" The master replied, "When the bell inside you rings without being struck." The student said, "I do not hear it." The master answered, "Because you are listening only for sound, not silence." Philosophical commentary. The bell that rings itself is a metaphor for realization that arises not through effort, but through stillness. In Zen, there is a distinction between doing and being, between seeking and seeing. Enlightenment is not a destination we reach by force. It is a state that unfolds when all striving ceases. Like a bell, it rings on its own when the air is clear, when the listener is quiet. Toma's journey is the journey of the modern mind, brilliant, analytical, skeptical, but noisy. He arrives at the monastery full of sharpness, but it is only when he softens, when he surrenders his stance, that he hears what cannot be taught. The bell is not a miracle of sound. It is the miracle of presence, psychological reflection in psychological terms. Toma experiences a breakthrough that bypasses cognitive control. Much of our thinking is rooted in the prefrontal cortex, analysis, logic, prediction, but transformative insight often comes from the deeper brain, the limbic system, the right hemisphere, the non-verbal self. These insights are not forced. They are allowed. Modern life promotes constant stimulation. We rarely sit long enough to let realization emerge. The bell's lesson is simple but profound. Clarity arrives not when we grasp tighter, but when we release in trauma therapy. This is also true. Healing does not come from solving the past like a puzzle. It comes when the nervous system feels safe enough to soften, when the inner bell, long muted, begins to resonate again. We are all carrying a bell inside, but we must learn to stop striking. Meditative, closing. What is the bell in your life? What truth have you been trying to force, explain, or reach? Can you allow it to come on its own? Tonight, sit quietly. Let your thoughts rise and fall like breath. Do not chase them. Do not suppress them. Just be still. Listen, not for a sound, but for a space. Let the silence deepen. Let the bell inside you ring without reason, without hand, without plan. The Buddha said, truth is not something outside to be discovered. It is something inside to be realized. Let go of needing to understand. Let go of needing to arrive. Just sit, and when the moment is ready, the bell will ring. Story 10. The Garden of Empty Hands. The rains had just begun to fall over the southern hills of Nara, soft and steady, soaking into the cracked paths of the village and breathing life back into the thirsty rice fields. The old Zen master, Ikon, stood barefoot in the courtyard of his small temple, his palms facing the grey sky as though blessing the water itself. Akon had once been a celebrated scholar in Kyoto, praised for his knowledge of the sutras and his elegant sermons, but he had left that life behind quietly, without farewell after a single morning when, while speaking to a large crowd about compassion, he found himself weeping in silence, not from joy nor from pain, but from an unbearable emptiness behind. The words, "That day he burned all his manuscripts, shaved his head anew, and walked south until his legs could carry him no further. There he built a modest hermitage in an abandoned garden and began again." People still came. At first, a few villagers seeking blessings for harvests or healing for their children. Later, others wandering monks, merchants, women with burdened hearts drawn by the silence around him more than any teaching. They would sit with him in the garden, share tea, and leave with no words exchanged. Only a strange sense that something had been returned to them, though they could not name what. Among those who came was a young man named Shun. Shun was not like the others. He was not lost, nor wounded, nor quietly seeking. He was angry. A failed student of another monastery, Shun had been dismissed by his previous master for pride and defiance. He knew the sutras by heart. He could quote the Diamond Sutra backward, but he despised the soft-spoken monks who moved like ghosts and bowed too much. He came to Aiken with one purpose: to break him, to expose what he believed all Zen to be empty riddles to soothe cowards. Aiken did not resist. He welcomed him with warm rice and pickled plums, and allowed him to stay as long as he wished. For the first 2 weeks, Shun was relentless. He interrupted Aiken's meditations with loud questions. He challenged him during morning walks. He shouted, "What is the sound of truth?" and then mocked the silence. But Aiken, unshaken, only responded with the same gentle nod or a gaze that wandered not to the words, but to the wind playing through the pine needles above them. "This is a game to you," Shun spat one morning. "You sit here like a turtle, hiding behind silence." Icon smiled. "Perhaps, but even turtles walk eventually." Shun grew more frustrated. He expected rebuke. He wanted fire, but none came, and so, after a month of testing, he gave up. He stayed, though he no longer mocked. He helped in the garden. He sat in meditation, sometimes beside Icon, sometimes alone, yet his heart remained heavy, filled with a question he could not ask. One evening, as spring melted fully into summer, Shun found Icon seated by a rock in the center of the garden, staring at a single chrysanthemum blooming beside a patch of dying weeds. He approached and sat silently. "Tell me," Shun finally whispered, "why do you not remove the weeds?" Icon did not answer. Instead, he turned and asked, "What do you see?" "A flower," and Shun squinted. "And weeds, ugly ones." Icon nodded slowly. "I once tore weeds from this garden every day. I worked until my back ached, believing that purity was found in removal. But the weeds returned, always. Then one year, I did nothing. I left them. I sat and watched. And in time, I saw how the weeds curled around the stones, how they held moisture in the dry months, how the insects danced in their shade. I saw that what I called weed was simply the name I gave to what I did not understand." Shun frowned. "But they are not beautiful, not to the eye, but perhaps to the soil. And what the eye finds ugly may feed what the root calls life." The young man was quiet. That night, he did not sleep. Weeks passed. Shun stayed through summer and into the slow death of autumn. He spoke less. He studied nothing, but he listened. To the garden its rustling changes, its unspeaking grace. He began to rise early, sweeping the paths, harvesting what little the temple grew, cooking meals that fed them both. The anger inside him dimmed, though it did not vanish. It coiled inward, waiting. Then, one morning in early winter, a child came to the temple gates. She was barely 8, barefoot and shivering, with an old woman's eyes. She said nothing, only stared up at Icon and then at Shun, her face unreadable. Icon simply opened the door wider, beckoning her in. Shun scowled. "What is this?" he asked later. "A temple is not an orphanage." Icon tilted his head. She brought no burden, only breath. Breath does not feed us. She is another mouth. Then let us grow more rice. "You cannot carry the whole world," Shun snapped. "Your hands are empty." Icon said nothing. The girl stayed, and over the coming weeks, she never once spoke. Not a word, but she watched. She watched Shun's hands as he chopped vegetables. She followed him as he swept leaves. She mirrored his breath. During Zen, and one morning, when he opened his eyes from meditation, he found her sitting across from him in the exact same posture and blinking, unmoving. It unnerved him, not because she disturbed him, but because he could see his own mind reflected in her stillness, and it terrified him. That night, as Icon sat beneath the stars, Shun approached him. "I cannot stay," he said. Icon nodded, unsurprised. "I came to defeat you. I stayed to learn from you. But now, I see, there is nothing to learn. Only something I cannot grasp, something I cannot name, and that is worse." Icon looked at him with kindness. "Then go. Take the child with you." Shun froze. "What? She will not speak here. But she might speak with you. You still carry fire. Perhaps that will warm her." Shun shook his head. "I cannot teach her anything." Icon smiled. then teach her nothing. Silence, and then, without understanding why, Shun bowed for the first time in his life with both hands and head to the ground. He left the next morning, the girl walking beside him through the mist. Years passed, no one heard from them. Aiken's garden aged in peace. But one spring morning, an elderly monk from another region came to visit the hermitage. He bowed to Aiken and said, "There is a teacher in the northern provinces. He walks barefoot through villages and never gives sermons, but wherever he stops, children follow him. He carries no texts, only seeds. They call him the Garden of Empty Hands." Aiken said nothing that night. He sat beneath the stars, a single chrysanthemum blooming at his side, and the weeds, they had never looked more alive. Story 11. The shadow beneath the Belther monastery bell rang 3 times at dawn. The sound was deep, resonant, and long, echoing through the sleepy mist that rolled gently over the stone paths and silent pines. At its heart, the bell did not call for prayer. It did not summon for discipline. It simply was a presence, a breath, a reminder that something larger than thought still sang in silence. John, a young novice who had arrived only a month ago, stood quietly in the bell tower, barefoot. He was not yet assigned temple duties. His days were spent sweeping courtyards, fetching water, and observing the elder monks without asking questions. But every morning, long before the others stirred, he would creep toward the tower, captivated by the bell's vibrations. Something in it moved through his ribs like memory. He had come to the monastery after his father's sudden death. A heart attack in the middle of the night, a silenced final for a boy barely 15. His mother had sent him to live with her brother, a lay devotee who had once trained at the monastery. "Go learn peace," she had said, though her eyes betrayed her grief. "Maybe it will teach you how to breathe again." But John could not breathe, not fully. Each inhalation stopped halfway in his chest, like a cough that forgot how to surface. He smiled when spoken to, bowed when expected, and kept his questions buried beneath thin layers of compliance. It was Abbot Shune who first noticed him lingering near the bell. "You listen like a deer in the forest," Shune said one afternoon. While trimming the garden, John looked up, startled. "I don't mean to disturb." "You don't disturb," Shune said, placing the shears down. "But you seem disturbed." John lowered his gaze. I like the bell. And yet you do not. Ring it." "I'm not allowed," Shune smiled. "Permission is a concept. Sound is not." That night, John dreamt of his father standing beneath the bell, smiling yet faceless. When he reached out to touch him, the figure vanished and the bell began to hum on its own, louder and louder until he awoke with his hand trembling. The next morning, John returned before dawn. This time, Shune stood beside him. "Do you know the story of the bell?" The abbot asked. "No, master. It was forged 100 years ago by a blind monk named Caneo. He melted broken tools, scrap metal, even old swords once used in war. They say he sang into the fire as he shaped it, not with words, but with a chant that contained no beginning and no end." John tilted his head. "Why no beginning?" "Because suffering has always been," Shone said, "and peace is not a destination, but a returning." John stood silently, unsure of what to say. "The bell is struck not to call others, but to remind ourselves," Shone continued. "Remind us to return not to a place, but to a presence." That evening, as twilight dipped the sky in indigo, John stood alone before the bell once more. He reached up hesitated, and then let the striker fall gently against the rim. A sound rose long, low, infinite. But something strange happened. As the bell rang, a black bird flew from beneath its base and vanished into the woods. John stepped back, startled. In the dirt beneath the bell, there was a dark patch, like a shadow that didn't belong to anything. Later that week, John returned with a lantern. He crouched and gently brushed the earth beneath the bell. His fingers struck something firm. He dug carefully and uncovered a small, weathered box. Inside was a cloth bundle. He unwrapped it to find a journal, faded with age. The first page read, "Kenyo's notes, for the shadow that never left me." He turned the pages slowly. The writing was small, deliberate, full of pain and clarity. Kenyo spoke of a war he had fled, of people he could not save, of the rage that blinded him before his eyes did. He wrote of melting down his own sword, the same one that had once taken lives. And in the last pages, he described the forging of the bell knot to ring peace into the world, but to absorb his sorrow with every strike. The bell is hollow not because it is empty, the final entry read, but because it holds what cannot be spoken. John closed the book and sat quietly for hours. For the first time in weeks, he wept not the sharp sobs of despair, but a slow, quiet stream that seemed to come from some place older than his own grief. That night, Shun found him sitting in the moonlight. "You found the shadow, didn't you?" the abbot asked. John nodded. "Kaneo poured his sorrow into that bell," Shun said, sitting beside him. "But sorrow does not disappear. It echoes." Chun's voice trembled. "Then why do we still strike it?" "To remind ourselves," Shun said gently, "that we are not alone in our sadness. Each sound is not just a call, it is an embrace." Over the following weeks, June began to breathe more deeply. He no longer came to the bell only at dawn. Sometimes he sat beside it at noon, or dusk, or in the silent blue before night. He would listen, not just to the sound, but to the silence that followed the space between the strikes, where something vast and invisible moved through him like wind through trees. One morning, Shun placed a hand on his shoulder. "Would you like to ring it today?" Jun nodded. He stepped forward, lifted the striker, and let it fall. The bell sang, and Jun, for the first time since his father's passing, felt the breath enter his chest fully, travel through his ribs, and reach his belly without resistance. It did not fix his pain. It did not erase his loss, but it opened a space wide enough for him to sit within it as he stood there. He remembered Kenyo's final words and whispered them to himself. Peace is not the absence of shadow, but the bell that rings within it. And in that moment, he was no longer just a boy in mourning. He was a vessel hollow, yes, but filled with something far older than sorrow and more enduring than silence. Story 12. The Garden of Stones, long before the great monasteries rose atop the green shoulders of the mountain. Before pilgrims laid their weary feet on its mossy paths, there was a small village nestled at the edge of a silent forest. It was a place untouched by time, where the mist rolled in each morning like a soft whisper from the heavens, and the only clock was the slow procession of seasons brushing against the old roofs. In that village lived a man named Deiji. He was a gardener, but not of flowers or fruit. He cultivated stones. Every morning, before the sun had lifted its golden eyelids, Daiji walked barefoot into the glade behind his hut, where dozens of stones lay arranged in carefully drawn spirals and circles, paths and still centers, as if the earth itself were dreaming in patterns. His neighbors thought him peculiar. "What use is a garden that feeds no one?" they would mutter. "Rocks cannot be sold in the market. Children cannot eat them." But Daiji never argued. He simply bowed. It was said that Daiji had once been a soldier, that he had wandered for many years, far beyond the mountains and rivers, into lands whose names the villagers could not pronounce. They whispered that he had seen death too closely, and that one night, standing knee-deep in a battlefield turned to ash, he had laid down his sword and wept not out of sorrow or fear, but out of a silence so profound it cracked him open like thunder through still air. He returned home with nothing but a small stone wrapped in cloth, which he carried like a child against his chest. It was the first stone of his garden. The villagers never asked about it, and Daiji never offered. Silence suited him, but children, curious and innocent, often slipped into his garden when he wasn't looking. They would tiptoe along the raked lines, balance on the larger stones, and whisper to each other about what they imagined: ancient dragons sleeping beneath the moss, stars trapped in the granite, or secret doorways into other worlds. Sometimes, Daiji would quietly join them, hands folded, smile soft. "Do not chase the meaning," he once told a boy who asked, "What is this for?" "Let it come to you like the wind comes to the leaves." Without asking, one spring, a stranger arrived. She wore a faded robe and carried a satchel that jingled faintly when she walked. Her face was calm, her gaze steady. She watched Daiji tend his stones for many mornings before speaking. "Do you believe stones can remember?" she asked one day, as Daiji poured water over a flat rock in the center of the spiral. Daiji did. "Not look up, only those that are listened to." The woman nodded. "Then I have come to remember with you." She knelt and placed a small stone beside his. It was dark green, veined with silver like frost. Her fingers lingered on it. "My daughter died last winter," she said simply. Her name was Amaya. "I have carried this stone from the river where we used to bathe. I could not bury her, could not let her go, but I think perhaps ... she can rest here." Daiji said nothing. He reached out and adjusted the stone slightly, aligning it with a nearby crescent of white pebbles. The woman watched, her tears falling like light rain on the moss dot. So began a quiet companionship. Each day she returned. Some mornings she wept, other days she was silent. Daiji offered her no lessons, no comfort, only space. And in that space, she softened. More villagers came, slowly at first, bringing small stones from places that held meaning. A cliff where someone had proposed, a field where a parent had once sung, the ashes of a burned house now grown over in weeds. Daiji never turned anyone away. He simply received, arranged, listened. The garden grew not with flowers or fruit, but with memory. Then one day, a boy came running from the hills, panting and wild-eyed. "Master, Daiji, there's a monk from the city temple, he's coming to see you. He wears gold robes and rides a horse." By noon, the monk arrived. His name was Genkai, and he spoke with a voice as polished as his staff. "I have heard of your garden," he said, looking over the spirals. "I have heard it brings peace, that people come and sit among your stones and find clarity." Daiji nodded. "But tell me," the monk continued, "what is the teaching? What is the truth you offer here?" Daiji looked at him, then, wordlessly, he picked up a rake and handed it to the monk. Genkai hesitated, then took it. He began to rake, clumsily at first, the wood scratching against gravel. He tried to form patterns, copying what he saw, but the lines were crooked, his circle incomplete. Frustrated, He paused. "What am I supposed to feel?" he asked. Daiji took the rake and smoothed the lines, not to erase, but to begin again. He said, "When the heart is still, the pattern forms itself." The monk frowned. "That is not a teaching, that is poetry." Daiji smiled gently. "Perhaps the two are not so different." Genkai left before dusk, his staff striking the earth a little harder than when he arrived. That night it rained, a gentle rain, slow and constant, washing over the stones and the moss and the soil. By morning, many of the raked patterns had blurred, but no one minded. The villagers arrived one by one, each with a cloth to dry the stones and hands to start again. Even children began to rake, laughing as their fingers etched fresh spirals into the earth. And somewhere near the edge, the woman with the silver-veined stone sat silently, her hands folded over her heart. She no longer wept, but her eyes, watching, the water slide off the granite, were full of something vast and still. Years passed. Daiji grew older. His hands trembled, his steps slowed. But each morning he still walked the garden, still bowed to the stones, still listened. Then, one winter, he did not come out. They found him in his hut, seated by the window, his eyes closed, a single stone. Resting in his lap, his face was peaceful. No one cried. Instead, the villagers gathered in the garden. Each brought a stone not to mourn, but to remember. A circle was formed in the center of the spiral, and Daiji's final stone placed within. It and the raking began again. Today, that garden still exists, though no roads lead to it. Travelers find it not by maps, but by silence and inner stillness that pulls them through the mist. There, in that quiet place, stones still speak, not in words, but in the hush between them. And if you sit long enough, breathe softly enough, listen deeply enough, you may hear what Daiji once did, not a voice, but a presence, the presence of peace, of return, of the garden that remembers everything. Story 13. The bamboo gate. The mountain path was steep, littered with leaves and long shadows. A young woman named Alara made her way up the trail, guided only by the crunch of her footsteps and the low hum of her breath. She had left behind a bustling city and a fractured life, one scarred by betrayal, a failing marriage, and the weight of self-loathing that had slowly hardened into despair. Alara was not seeking answers. She was only trying to find silence. At the top of the mountain sat an old Zen temple, hidden beneath a canopy of cedar and pine. She arrived just as the sun began to sink into the western sky, painting the clouds with shades of bronze and coral. An elderly monk greeted her at the bamboo gate, bowing slowly, as though he had expected her all along. "You have come far," he said. "I don't know why I came," Alara admitted, her voice brittle. "Then you are already closer to the way than most," the monk smiled. "Come, the tea is warm." Inside the temple, simplicity reigned. Tatami mats, wooden beams, and the scent of sandalwood welcomed her. The silence was not empty, it pulsed with presence. Alara stayed. Days turned into weeks. She rose with the morning bell, raked the stones in the Zen garden, and shared meals in stillness. Yet within her, a battle raged. The silence exposed her sorrow, amplifying it like a cracked bell. One morning, the monk invited her for a walk beyond the temple grounds. They passed terraced hills and patches of wild iris until they reached an old bamboo gate in the middle of a stone wall. The gate had no lock, no door, just to swinging panels, bound by a rope. "What is this place?" Alara asked. "This," said the monk, is the gate of no escape. She frowned. Why would anyone build such a gate? It's not built, it's revealed. He gestured for her to enter. As she stepped through the bamboo gate, the path changed. The air grew colder. The trees, once elegant and tall, stood like withered sentinels. She walked on, and memories surged, visions of the past, voices of those she had lost, the nights she had cried herself to sleep. The landscape of her own suffering stretched before her. She turned back to call for the monk, but he was gone. Only the gate remained behind her, silent and unmoving. Alone, Alara wandered. Each corner she turned led her deeper into the corridors. Of her memory, she saw her mother's funeral, where she had stood without tears. She saw her ex-husband's eyes that once held affection but had turned to indifference. She heard her own voice, brittle with resentment. She collapsed beneath a tree, overwhelmed. "I can't go further," she whispered. Then a voice, not external, but unmistakably re-echoed in her mind. "What is it you cannot face?" "Myself," she answered. For hours she remained curled on the earth. And then a small thing happened. A breeze stirred a single bamboo leaf, and its rustle brought a memory not of sorrow, but of stillness. She remembered being 5, lying beneath a tree just like this, tracing clouds with her fingers, untouched by regret or fear. The sound of the leaf reminded her that even within pain, stillness could exist. She stood. The path home was no less haunted, but it no longer threatened her. The ghosts of her past no longer chased her. They walked beside her. When she finally stepped back through the bamboo gate, the monk was there, waiting, as if he had never left. "You passed through," he said. Gently, I walked in circles. "I thought I was lost." "You were not lost," he replied. "You were circling the center." A Zen parable. The mirror of the Hate warrior once visited a Zen master and asked, "Show me the path to victory." The master handed him a mirror and said, "Clean this." The warrior wiped it. The master took it back, breathed on it, and handed it back again. "Clean it again." After a while, the warrior grew angry. "I came to learn of battle, not mirrors." The master smiled. "Only a clean mirror can reflect what is." The warrior paused. He looked into the mirror and saw his own face, angry and confused. "Until you see yourself clearly," the master said, "you fight shadows." Philosophical reflection. The gate of no escape is not a place but a threshold in the mind. When we cease to run from pain, to distract ourselves with work, relationships, or noise, we encounter the unfiltered rawness of our suffering. But this encounter is not a punishment, it is a passage. Much like Alara, we often find ourselves at the edge of unbearable emotion and turn away, believing that entering it will destroy us. Yet the paradox of Zen is this: when we fully enter our suffering with awareness, it begins to transform. The gate opens, not outward, but inward. Zen does not promise a life free of sorrow. Instead, it teaches that within sorrow there is wisdom. Within despair, clarity. The gate is not to be avoided. It is to be crossed, again and again, until the self we fear dissolves into the self we truly are. Psychological insight. Modern psychological terms. Ilara's journey mirrors the therapeutic process of exposure and integration. Trauma, guilt, and emotional pain do not vanish through avoidance. They entrench. But when we allow ourselves to step into the experience safely, gradually, mindfully, we process and integrate the emotions. The gate of no escape is akin to the threshold in trauma work. the decision to stop fleeing. Mindfulness-based therapies such as ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy, or DBT, dialectical behavior therapy, rely on similar principles, inviting patients to sit with discomfort, recognize thought patterns, and cultivate non-reactivity. The past cannot be erased, but its grip on us can soften. Healing begins not with answers, but with stillness. Meditative closing now. Take a moment, close your eyes, breathe slowly. Imagine you are standing before your own bamboo gate. There is no lock, no guard, no map. Only you will you step through. And when you do, what do you carry that no longer serves you? As the old monk said, the gate is not built, it is revealed. Let the silence show you the way. Let your suffering become your teacher, and let your heart become a mirror that reflects the world clean and clear. Story 14. The Sculptor of Emptiness. Long ago, in the outskirts of a mountainous province, there lived a man known only as Kenji, a recluse sculptor whose reputation whispered like mist through the neighboring villages. People spoke of how he carved, not just stone, but silence itself. His figures, whether of saints, animals, or faceless forms, bore an inexplicable stillness. Locals often said, they do not resemble people, they resemble the space that remains after someone has left. Kenji was neither old nor young. His face, carved by time and solitude, bore the same serenity as his sculptures. He rarely spoke, and when he did, it was never about his art. He lived in a modest hut near the bend of the river, where fog curled like sleeping cats and the forest wept with dew each morning. One day, a young traveler named Aki arrived. He was thin, with calloused hands and eyes that held questions too large for their sockets. Aki had wandered for months, seeking meaning after a fire had claimed both his family and the village where he was raised. He had heard of the sculptor who shaped silence and believed that perhaps such a man could chisel the chaos from his own heart. He found Kenji seated outside his hut, sharpening a chisel. Without greeting, Kenji glanced at him and gestured to a stone bench. They sat together in silence for an hour. At last, Aki said, "I want to learn." Kenji did not ask what. He simply stood, entered his hut, and returned with a lump of raw stone, a chisel, and a wooden mallet. He handed them to Aki and led him behind the hut to a small clearing where half-carved figures lay abandoned, covered in moss. "Shape what you see," Kenji said. Aki hesitated. "What should I make?" "Something that isn't there," Kenji replied. For days, Aki struggled. Each morning, Kenji offered him a stone and the same words, "Shape what you see." At night, Aki sat before the river, the silence pressing against him like a dense fog. He tried to sculpt birds, trees, faces, flames, but each attempt felt lifeless. The stone resisted, as if mocking his trembling hands. One evening, Aki shouted into the forest, "I don't see anything." His voice startled a heron which lifted gracefully into the dusk. Kenji, who had been seated nearby, unseen, said, "Then carve that." The next morning, Aki began again, but this time he did not think of herons, or flames, or grief. He placed the chisel into the stone and simply listened to the weight of the tool, the tension in his wrist, the breath passing through his ribs. He did not sculpt a bird, he sculpted a hollow space, an arch of air surrounded by featherless wings. And though it looked like nothing in particular, something about it made Kenji pause when he passed. He did not comment, but a corner of his mouth turned upward. As weeks turned into months, Aki learned to see without naming. He no longer tried to express his grief. He began to feel it was no longer necessary. Instead, he carved quiet moments that pause before a branch breaks. The distance between a question and its answer, the softness of sorrow unspoken. One day, a monk from a distant temple visited Kenji. He had heard of the sculptor and wished to commission a statue of the Buddha for the monastery garden. Kenji shook his head. "The Buddha does not belong to stone," he said. The monk persisted. "Then what can you offer us?" Kenji turned to Aki, now seated by the river, carving the outline of a bowl with no base. "He can show you what you've forgotten." The monk approached Aki and studied the piece. "What is this meant to be?" "A bowl," Aki replied. "It holds nothing." "That is what it is for." The monk nodded, troubled and intrigued. He took the piece with him to the monastery. Months passed. Pilgrims began to arrive, not to see the usual statues of deities or saints, but to sit before a peculiar sculpture, baseless bowl, perfectly smooth, that caught the wind like a whisper. Many claimed they heard answers when sitting before it. Others said they heard nothing at all and left transformed nonetheless. Aki, however, remained with Kenji. One evening, he asked, "Why do people see so much in what we do when we shape only absence?" Kenji replied, "Because emptiness is the only form that does not lie." Aki nodded. He had begun to understand. One winter, Kenji fell ill. He lay in his hut, bones brittle, breath thin. Aki stayed beside him, bringing warm broth and silent companionship. On the final morning, Kenji reached beneath his cot and pulled out a small, wrapped bundle. "Open it when I am gone," he said. When the breath left him, Aki did not cry. He sat beside the old man's body until the sun slipped behind the trees. Then, with reverence, he opened the bundle. Inside was a stone, smooth and round. It bore no carving. There was also a slip of paper with 4 words. "The sculpture is you." Aki sat for a long time, holding the untouched stone. He felt no need to shape it. Years passed. Aki never again carved in stone. Instead, he taught others how to see. He spoke little. He listened often. People came, as they had once come, to Kenji not for statues, but for silence. And so, the sculptor of emptiness passed on his art not by chiseling matter, but by removing all that obscured the essence. What remained was not a legacy in stone, but a stillness that shaped the hearts of those who sat in its presence. Story 15. The candle in the cavit was deep winter in the northern mountains, and snow had sealed the world in a white silence. The river had frozen mid-laughter, and the pines groaned softly under the weight of snow, like monks bowing in meditation. In the village of Nanshu, perched on the edge of a cliff, the villagers had all but retreated indoors, their breath fogging up windows like forgotten dreams. But old Master Riku, the hermit monk of the region, had not been seen for weeks. People said he had gone into the cave again. The cave on Mount Hoka was not an ordinary cave. It was said to be where spirits whispered and shadows clung to the soul. Only the brave, foolish, or enlightened ventured inside. Riku had been all 3 at various stages of his life. Some believed he was seeking death. Others whispered he was seeking silence deeper than silence itself. Only one soul worried enough to climb up after him, a young boy of 17 with restless eyes and a scar across his chin. Jun had been apprenticed to the monastery before it burned down the previous spring. The fire had taken more than the buildings, it had taken his belief in the sacred. But he still remembered. Master Riku, sitting under the plum tree, murmuring, "Real light is born only in the deepest dark." So when Jun heard that the old monk had vanished into the mountain, he packed a satchel with dry rice, a flint stone, and a candle stub. At dawn, with a scarf around his face, he began the long ascent. By midday, the world had turned to white fog and aching wind. The trail vanished, but Jun knew the mountain by heart. Eventually, a black hole opened in the rock facer mouth, yawning to swallow the world. The cave of Gyojin. He entered at first. The cave was like any other sharp stones, narrow passageways, the stale breath of earth, but as he went deeper, it felt less like space and more like time collapsing. The silence was not silent. It pulsed. He lit his candle and held it like a shield. Shadows flickered, and the flames seemed to hesitate. "Master Riku," he called, but only his voice returned, warped and thin. Hours passed, or perhaps days. Time softened in the cave, like fruit left too long in the sun. Jun sat by an underground pool, the candle beside him. He began to speak aloud, more to himself than to the monk he had once followed. "Why did you leave us?" he whispered. "Why did you stop teaching? Why did you stop believing?" The cave listened. Somewhere in the distance, a drop of water echoed. Jun fell asleep. In the dark, dreams came like birds flitting between thought and memory. He dreamt of the fire, of monks crying, of wood splintering, of himself running with the sacred texts in hand, only to trip. The flames had kissed his chin. That was how he earned the scar. When he awoke, the candle was out, and sitting across from him, as if born of shadow, was Master Riku. His beard was longer, whiter. His eyes were not eyes, but windows to something Jun could not name. The old man said nothing. Instead, he held up a bowl of melted snow and placed it before the boy. "Drink," he said. Jun obeyed. The water was cold, piercing, yet it seemed to reach places that had not been touched in years. "I thought you had died," Jun said finally. "I did," said Riku, "many times." He looked at the boy and touched his chest lightly. "Do you know the difference between the darkness of the cave and the darkness of the mind?" Jun shook his head. "The cave's darkness is neutral. It does not want anything from you, but the darkness of the mind. That's where desire grows teeth." Chen's lip trembled. "Then why are you here? What are you looking for?" Riku smiled. "The same thing you are." Jun said nothing. "I came here to die once," the monk continued. "But then I found silence deeper than death. And in that silence I heard the truth." "What truth?" "That the mind fears its own shadow more than it fears the world." The candle flickered back to life, but Jun had not lit it. It sat between them, flames standing tall like a lotus blooming. Riku stood slowly. "Come, there is something you must see." He led Jun down a winding path where the cave opened into a chamber, vast and still. In its center stood a stone altar. On it, a single wooden box. The monk approached, unlatched it, and revealed what was inside: a mirror. Jun stared into it. At first he saw only himself. Then the image shimmered. He saw the burning monastery, saw himself running. But this time, he saw the moment he had tripped, saw his own hand reach to throw the sacred texts aside to save himself. He gasped, "Rik, you spoke. You've punished yourself all this time, haven't you, for that choice?" Jun nodded, eyes brimming. "You believed you were a coward." "Yes." The monk touched the mirror. "But what if you were just human?" The reflection changed again, this time, showing Jun carrying a wounded monk on his back, dragging him through smoke. Jun blinked. Don't remember that. You don't want to. John fell to his knees. Tears came freely now. The cave did not echo them. It absorbed them like soil drinking rain. When we cannot forgive ourselves, Riku said, we lose our place in the world. So we retreat into caves real or imagined. John looked up. Can we ever leave them? The monk bent low. Only by bringing the candle out. And so they began their ascent. The way back was not easier, but it was clearer. The snowstorm had passed. At the mouth of the cave, John looked back. The candle in his hand burned steady, though no wind touched it. Before they parted, Riku placed a hand on Chun's shoulder. You will teach now. I'm not ready. No one ever is. The monk turned and walked back into the mountain. Not into the cave, but toward the rising sun on the other side. Chun stood alone, but no longer lonely. He descended into the village, where the temple ruins still smoldered with old grief. But he planted the candle there on a stone and sat beneath the plum tree. When people came asking questions, he simply listened, and from that silence, light began again. Story 16. The bellmakers silenced the village of Hoshimi, stood nestled between gentle hills and meandering rivers. Far from the clamor of cities, in this quiet hamlet lived a man known only as the bellmaker. His small workshop was perched near a forest shrine, surrounded by old cypress trees and moss-covered stones. Though his name had long faded from the mouths of villagers, everyone knew his craft. He forged temple bells, not small wind chimes, nor ornamental trinkets, but large, resonant bronze bells that called monks to meditation and farmers to stillness. He spoke little, smiled rarely, and seemed always immersed in listening rather than talking. Yet his bells, once struck, sang with such purity that even birds ceased their songs. There was something in the tone of softness at first, then a widening echo that wrapped around the ears and entered the chest like a prayer. Those who heard his bells swore that time slowed, thoughts paused, and for a few precious seconds, all suffering dissolved. One autumn morning, a young woman named Kiko arrived in the village. She was gaunt, eyes hollowed by grief, carrying nothing but a satchel of paper and a faded journal. She was a poet, or had been one, before words stopped coming. Her younger brother had drowned the previous winter under the ice of Lake Suki. Since then, silence filled her days, not the meditative kind, but the cruel emptiness of meaning lost. Friends offered comfort she could not hear. Her pen dried beside blank pages. In desperation, she followed a rumor that a bell made by the man of Hoshimi had once silenced the panic of a dying man and stilled the tremors of a mother who had lost her child. She arrived at his workshop, bowing low and speaking with cracked dignity. "I want you to make a bell," she said, "one that will let me feel again." The bell maker looked at her, unspeaking. He poured her tea, motioned for her to sit beside the hearth, then turned back to his workbench where molten bronze shimmered. She waited. No response came. For days she returned, repeating her plea. "Please, I need to hear something that's true. I need to be shaken awake." He never said yes. But on the 6th morning, he placed a blank clay mold on the floor between them and nodded. "I don't sell sound," he said finally. "I cast silence. That was all." She didn't understand, but she stayed. The days passed in quiet repetition. Kiko swept the workshop floor. She cleaned tools. She fetched water from the stream where koi danced beneath maple leaves. Still, the bellmaker said little, only gestures and short instructions. Yet she noticed how his silence was not cold. It held presence, like a deep pool with no wind on. Its surface dot each morning he would strike one of his old bells. The tone would hang in the air like incense. Then he would sit, eyes closed, hands still, until the echo faded completely. Kiko began to do the same. One morning, she noticed something unusual. When the echo disappeared, so did the tightness in her chest. Not all of it, but enough to breathe. One evening, as the stars rose and cicadas hummed, the bell-maker spoke. To shape a bell, he said, you must first empty your ears. He handed her a lump of clay. Shape the sound you miss. She didn't know how, but her fingers moved. She pressed and curved and sculpted, not with knowledge, but with ache. The clay took form awkward, uneven, but real. It resembled no known object, only a half-formed opening, like a mouth about to speak or a throat longing to sing. He nodded, as if satisfied. Then began the long ritual of forging. She watched as he ground copper and tin, melted them in the crucible, poured them into the molds she had shaped. It was laborious. At each stage he instructed, listen, not with ears, but with attention. When the fire dances too fast, it hisses lies, he said. Wait for it to hum. One night, as they cooled the bronze shell in a bath of moon-chilled water, he asked, why do you want this bell? She answered without thinking, because I'm afraid that if I don't hear something real, I'll forget he ever lived. The bellmaker's eyes softened. He lived, that is real. The forgetting comes from clinging to what has already passed. But I don't want to let go. Then don't, he said, but hold him gently. Not by memory, not by mourning, by presence. You are still here. That is where he echoes. Tears came then, quiet and warm. She didn't wipe them. He did not comfort her, yet she felt accompanied. The day finally came to test the bell. They carried it to the shrine before dawn. Fog swirled low over the trees. The bell was placed upon a stone pedestal. It was not large, not ornate, but it glowed with the pale sheen of birth. Kiko was handed a wooden mallet. Strike it, the bellmaker said. She hesitated, then let the mallet touch its side. The sound that emerged was not loud, not brilliant. It was low, deep, slow to rise. It seemed to unfold in layers, if it had been buried underground and now surfaced gently. The tone hovered, spread, and passed not only through the air, but through her chest, her bones, her skin. For the first time since her brother's death, her body felt warm, not in heat, but in wholeness. She fell to her knees, trembling not from grief, but from stillness. The bellmaker knelt beside her. That is your silence, he whispered. Inside it, all sound begins again. Kiko wept, not because of pain, but because something in her had been named without words. She looked at the bell, her own hand's shape now transformed. She thought of her brother, not his face, but his laughter. The way he splashed water at her when they were children, the half-remembered songs he sang, and she smiled. Before she left the village, she asked the bellmaker, why do your bells sound like they're remembering something? He replied, because they are not calling people. They are calling people back. Back to where? To the space before thoughts. The space where the soul listens. Years later, Kiko would return to poetry, but her verses had changed. They no longer strained to speak wisdom. They sat quietly on the page, waiting for the reader to arrive. Like a bell waits for the wind, her favorite line, one she repeated in readings, was this: in the silence after the bell fades, I find the world I forgot to hear. And somewhere in the hills of Ho Chi Minh, a new bell was hung on the forest shrine. It was never rung by hand, but every now and then, when wind passed through at dusk, it sang softly, and those who walked the shrine path at twilight often paused, held their breath, and remembered someone they thought they had lost, not in sorrow, but in stillness. Story 17. The stone in the stream there was a quiet village nestled beneath the foothills of Mount Horasan, where the mists drifted like spirits and the wind carried the hush of centuries. Here old men sipped tea without words, and the sound of falling leaves told stories more ancient than books. In this village lived a man named Riku, known for two things: his skilled hands as a carpenter, and the stone he wore round his neck. The stone was smooth and black, shaped like a river. Pebble. It was bound by a simple hemp cord that had frayed with age. Riku never removed it, not to bathe, nor to sleep. He had worn it since he was 15, when his father died and he found the stone by the stream behind their house. No one knew what the stone meant, and Riku never spoke of it. But those who looked into his eyes sensed the weight he carried was not merely physical. Riku built beautiful things: sliding doors that whispered closed, altars that held incense and stillness, bridges that bowed like monks. Yet his smile was guarded, and his voice seldom rose above a murmur. He had never married, though many gentle women had tried to bring laughter back into his life. Instead, he walked the forest paths alone, the stone pressing against his chest, like a second heart. One winter, an old Zen monk named Genji arrived in the village. He was a wanderer with no temple, his robes patched, his sandals threadbare. But when he spoke, even the restless children stilled. There was a gravity in him that did not depend on robes or status. He stayed at the edge of the village in a small, abandoned tea house, accepting food from those who passed and offering nothing in return but silence and presence. One morning, Riku brought Genji a new wooden ladle, carved from pine and sanded until it shone. Genji accepted it with a deep bow. "You walk heavily," the monk said after a long pause. Riku glanced at him. "The snows are deep." Genji smiled softly. "And yet snow falls light." Riku didn't answer. He nodded and turned to leave. But Genji's voice followed him. "Would you sit with me, carpenter?" Something in the way Genji said it without force, yet with full attention made Riku hesitate. He sat on the edge of the porch, the old stone at his chest cold through. His tunic dot. After a time, Genji asked, "What do you carry?" Riku looked at him, startled. Genji nodded toward the stone. Riku hesitated. "It's nothing." The monk said nothing more, and they sat in silence until dusk. As the days passed, Riku found himself returning. Sometimes they talked about wood grain, about trees, about the wind. More often they didn't. Silence unfolded between them like an old blanket, worn but warm. It was in spring, when the cherry blossoms began to whisper of beauty and loss, that Riku spoke. "I found it the day my father died," he said quietly. "He slipped on the rocks near the stream. I was there. I froze. I didn't reach for him. His hands, calloused and strong, trembled in his lap. I was only 15, but still, I could have maybe done something. I heard him call out, and I just stood there." Genji did not interrupt. His gaze was like a still pool, unjudging. Later that day, I walked to the same place. There was this stone, smooth, cold. I picked it up and placed it here. He touched the cord at his neck. I told myself I would carry it, always, so I would not forget. "What is it you wish not to forget? Genji asked gently. My weakness, my failure. Have you forgotten? Your father? Never. Then why do you carry the stone? Riku looked down. The wind moved through the blossoms, scattering them across the porch like confetti from another world. It is my punishment. Genji shook his head. It has become your identity. Riku frowned. You do not carry the stone to remember your father, the monk continued. You carry it to remember who you were in that moment. But you are not that moment. Silence stretched again. Riku felt the weight of the stone. Somehow it had grown heavier. Genji reached into the folds of his robe and pulled out a small wooden bowl. Inside was water, clear, still. He placed it between them. See the water, he said. Imagine it is the stream. Now take the stone and drop it in. Riku's hand hovered. But I drop it, Genji said simply. With trembling fingers, Riku undid the cord. The stone was cool and familiar in his palm. He looked at it one last time, then let it fall. The bowl rippled. The stone vanished. Water stilled. Now, said Genji, tell me what you see. Riku stared. I see only water. Exactly, Genji smiled. The stream does not keep the stone. It flows. You, too, must flow. That night, Riku returned home without the stone. He walked through the village and past the stream, where the moon painted silver on the rocks. His chest felt bare, but also, for the first time, light. In the days that followed, he still carved wood, still walked the paths, but something had shifted. His steps were quieter, his gaze was clearer, and sometimes, just sometimes, he smiled. Villagers noticed. Children no longer feared his silence. Women no longer wondered about his sadness. They said Riku had changed, though no one could say how. Years passed. Genji moved on, as monks do, leaving no footprints behind. But one morning, a traveler arrived. In the village, weary from the road, he asked for shelter and food. Riku, now with grey in his beard, invited him in. As they sat beneath the blooming plum tree, Riku served tea. The traveler noticed a wooden bowl near the window, carved with delicate ripples. That's beautiful, he said. Riku smiled. It once held a stone. He said softly, but now it holds light. The traveler did not understand, but he remembered the warmth in Riku's voice, and the stream flowed on. Story 18. The Pebble in the Monk's Chute. Village of Kinzin lay nestled between soft emerald hills and rice fields rippling under the breath of spring. Life flowed here like water, steady, cyclical, unhurried. Among its few noteworthy places was a weathered old temple perched atop a stone hill, home to an aged monk known simply as Master Ryo. Ryo was a man of few words, his eyes always distant as if listening to something that escaped others. Children adored him for his stories. Farmers came to him when the rains failed, not for weather forecasts, but for calm. Even the village drunkard once sat weeping beside him under the Bodhi tree and left with a bowed head and silent lips. It was a quiet day in early autumn when a stranger arrived at the temple gates. He was a young man, tall and tense, with the rigid grace of someone trained in the sword. His name was Daiki, a former samurai who had laid down his blade after the war left him disillusioned and hollow. With no lord to serve and no peace within, he wandered the countryside searching for answers. I wish to become your disciple, Daiki said, kneeling before Master Ryo. The old monk studied the young man's posture, not humble enough, and his gaze not steady enough. Why? Ryo asked simply. Daiki looked away. I no longer know who I am. I've seen too much blood. My sword hand shakes even in stillness. I thought if I stayed here, I might learn peace. Ryo nodded, as if hearing something beyond Daiki's words. Very well, he said. But first, take off your sandals. Daiki obeyed. The monk handed him a broom. Sweep the path, every morning, before the sun clears the ridge. And that was it. No grand teachings, no chants, no rituals, just sweeping. Days turned into weeks. Autumn gold gave way to the chill of winter. Daiki swept the path at dawn, his breath forming clouds, his feet growing numb. He watched as Ryo sat for hours, simply watching leaves fall. Daiki wanted to scream sometimes. He had expected wisdom delivered like sword, strikes swift, powerful, enlightening. Instead, he was sweeping dirt. One morning, in the dead cold, Daiki arrived late. A pebble had lodged in his straw sandal, and each step up the hill had felt like a nail in his foot. Irritated, he yanked it off halfway, throwing the sandal down in frustration. When he arrived, Ryo was waiting. "You are late," he said. Daiki grunted, ashamed. "A stone in my sandal," he muttered. Ryo smiled. "Then why didn't you stop to remove it?" Daiki blinked. "I thought I could bear it. Just get to the top." Said Ryo. "And so the pain colored your steps?" "Yes, I suppose. You came here seeking peace," the old man continued. "But you carry the same habits that caused your suffering. You believe endurance is strength. It is not. Sometimes wisdom is knowing when to pause, remove the pebble, and walk freely again." Daiki stared, mouth slightly open. Ryo stood and motioned to the broom. "Go, sweep the path. But first, check your shoes." That night, Daiki couldn't sleep. The monk's words echoed. Was that all his life had been? Marching on with pebbles in his soul, telling himself it was noble to bear pain. From that day, his sweeping changed. He noticed the cracks in the stone path, the way frost settled in the corners before melting with the first light. He noticed how his own mind tried to race ahead, planning, regretting, doubting. He learned to pull it back gently, like leading a wild horse. One late afternoon, he found Ryo carving something into a flat stone. The monk didn't look up as Daiki approached. "Master," Daiki said, "may I ask you something?" Ryo nodded. "I used to believe that life was about discipline and control, that order brings peace. But even here, in all this stillness, I sometimes feel a storm within. Have I failed as a student?" Ryo blew stone dust from the carving and turned the tablet to face him. On it were the characters for still water, moving wind. "The surface may ripple," Ryo said, "but the depths remain calm. You cannot stop the wind, nor should you try. Let it pass." Daiki exhaled slowly. "But what about justice?" he asked suddenly. "In war, I did terrible things under the name of duty. Others did worse and now live like kings. Where is balance?" Ryo looked at him for a long time. "There was a thief once," he began. "He broke into a Zen temple and was caught. The monks, instead of punishing him, invited him to dinner. The thief was confused but accepted. Later, when he tried to leave with a silver bowl, the abbot caught him again. Still, he was not angry. He said, 'You must be hungry for more than food. Stay and learn.' The thief wept. Daiki frowned. "What became of him?" Ryo shrugged. "Some say he became a monk. Some say he returned to stealing. That is not the point. Justice is not always balance. Sometimes It is compassion. Daiki nodded. That night, he meditated by the koi pond, watching the orange shapes glide silently under moonlight. He thought of the men he had killed. Some had deserved it. Some had begged. Some had simply stood in the wrong place at the wrong time. He did not feel absolved, but he felt a loosening, a tiny crack in the armor he had worn even after laying down his blade. Years passed. The villagers grew used to Daiki's presence. Children called him the Silent One. He rarely spoke, but when he did, his words were simple and struck deep. One day, Ryo grew ill. The monk sat under the Bodhi tree, wrapped in a thin robe. Breath shallow. Daiki knelt beside him. "You came," Ryo whispered. "Good, I am here, master." Ryo's eyes twinkled. "Did you remove the pebble?" Daiki smiled through tears. "Not all of them, but I no longer walk with clenched teeth." Ryo chuckled weakly. "Then you understand." The old monk passed quietly, with a half smile on his lips. In time, Daiki inherited the temple, but he changed little. He swept the path every morning, even as his hair turned white. When villagers asked for teachings, he gave them brooms. When travelers came seeking answers, he told them to check their sandals. And under the Bodhi tree, carved into the trunk, were Ryo's final words to him. Peace is not the absence of pain, but the willingness to pause and meet it. They sat there, often, eyes distant, listening to the wind move through leaves, his sandals resting beside him. Story 19. The moon in the mirror, in a small, wind-worn village, tucked deep within the Japanese mountains, there lived an old woman named Sachiko. She was known not for her words, but for her silence. Every morning, she would sit beneath the old plum tree in her garden, staring into a bronze hand mirror that had long since tarnished. It was said she hadn't spoken a single word in over 30 years. Children would sneak peeks from behind their mother's sleeves, curious about the woman. With the silent eyes, travelers, monks, and scholars had come and gone, hoping to uncover her story. None succeeded, but those who looked closely at her face often left changed, with softer voices and heavier hearts, as though they had glimpsed something both beautiful and sorrowful that could not be named. Only one man remained persistent. His name was Koji, a calligrapher from the southern coast, who had lost his wife and child in a fire many years ago. The grief had burned through his voice, leaving his words brittle and his art heavy with sorrow. He came to the mountains not for inspiration, but for forgetting. When Koji heard the tale of the silent woman with the mirror, he felt a strange pull. Something in him recognized the shape of silence. He began to visit her garden daily, sitting a respectful distance away, offering tea but never speaking. She never looked at him, only into the mirror that caught no reflection. Weeks passed. The village whispered, amused by the man who had come to sit in silence with the ghost of a woman. One morning, when the mist still clung to the pine trees and dew jeweled the grass, Koji noticed the mirror in her hand tremble. She held it slightly higher than usual, angling it toward the sky. Koji followed her gaze, seeing only the pale morning moon hanging low in the sky. He whispered, not expecting her to respond. "Why do you look for the moon when the sun rises?" The old woman didn't answer, but a single tear fell onto the mirror's surface. For the first time, she turned to face him. Her eyes were deeper than age, and in them he saw an echo of his own loss. "You see the moon," she said quietly, "but you do not know its sorrow." Koji's breath caught in his throat. The voice, brittle and soft, cracked the silence like a fallen branch. He said nothing. His heart beat like a drum against the walls of his grief. Sachiko gestured for him to come closer. With trembling hands, she held out the mirror. He hesitated, then took it gently. The bronze was cool and pitted, its surface dulled by time, yet strangely warm at the center, like something still alive. In this mirror, she whispered, I see what was taken from me. A daughter, a husband, a night when fire and silence were the same. I looked into it that night and saw the moon staring back, not as light, but as witness. She turned away, eyes fixed again on the sky. Koji looked into the mirror, but saw nothing at first. Then, slowly, as if the mirror responded to sorrow rather than light, images began to shimmer, blurred, abstract, not reflections, but memories. A small child dancing under falling petals. A man with ink-stained hands laughing by candlelight. A flame curling up the wall like a serpent. Silence. He wept, not out of pity, but recognition. You kept it all here, he said, voice shaking. I was afraid if I let go, she replied, I would lose even their shadows. Koji held the mirror closer to his chest, and now she closed her eyes. Now I am ready to forget. They sat like that for a long time, two shadows on the grass, neither speaking. When the sun climbed higher, Koji placed the mirror between them. It caught the light, and for a moment reflected the sky as if it were whole again. Sachiko took a deep breath and smiled, faint as wind on water. Thank you, she said. Koji didn't know if she spoke to him, the mirror, or the moon. The next day, the old woman was gone. The villagers found the mirror beneath the plum tree, its surface polished, clean, and still. No one claimed it, yet no one dared throw it away. Koji took it with him when he left. He hung it in his studio, not for vanity, but as a window for the unseen. And though his calligraphy never again bore sorrow, it carried a quiet reverence, as if each stroke remembered a moon no longer visible. Years later, when he too had aged and his own voice had softened into silence, people would ask him where he found his peace. He would smile, gesture toward the mirror, and say, in the reflection of what no longer needs to be held. Zen parabole monk once asked his master, how do I let go of my grief? The master held up a bowl filled with water. Grief is like this, he said. If you hold it too long, your arms will tire. If you drink it, it may poison you. But if you place it before you and see it clearly, it will settle. The monk asked, and then the master smiled. Then the moon will reflect on its surface. Philosophical reflection, we often treat grief as a thing to conquer or avoid, forgetting that it is neither enemy nor friend. Grief is a witness it remembers what we fear to forget. Yet, in clinging too tightly, we trap ourselves in the shadows of what once was. When we dare to place our grief outside of ourselves, to see it as part of the mirror of life, it no longer rules us. It becomes a gentle echo guiding us toward compassion and depth. Psychological insight silence can be a sanctuary or a prison. Those who have experienced trauma may find words too small to hold their pain, but healing does not demand speaking. It asks only for witnessing, for being seen and held without judgment. In Koji and Sachiko's shared silence, we see that healing often begins not with answers, but with presence, with another who is not afraid to sit beside our sorrow without trying to fix it. Meditative closings sit quietly. Imagine holding a mirror in your hands. Let your thoughts settle like water after a storm. What do you see reflected? Do not judge, simply witness. And in that gentle act, remember, the moon does not resist the night. It reflects it, and still it shines. Story 20. The Bamboo of Forgiveness, the village of Senki, lay nestled in the low valley between two ranges of mountains blanketed in pine and mist. It was a place where time walked slowly, where cicadas sang in the summer heat, and the old traditions, still rooted deeply into the soil like the 1,000-year-old cypress at the temple gate. In this quiet village lived a man named Takashan, aged bamboo craftsman whose hands had shaped countless baskets, flutes, and ceremonial staffs over the decades. Takashi was known for his precision, his silence, and his sadness. Years ago, he had been a different man, jovial, quick with laughter, and proud of his only son. Hiro, Takashi, taught Hiro the art of bamboo, how to split it without splintering, how to steam and curve it, how to hear its hidden grain. But as Hiro grew, he resisted the slow and narrow path of his father. The boy had dreams of Tokyo, of neon signs and music and money. Takashi would strike the workshop table with his cane and shout, "Bamboo is humble and honest. It bends but never breaks." Hiro would simply sigh, bundle his sketchpad, and retreat into silence. Then, one autumn night, Hiro vanished. He left a note scrawled with passion and resentment. "I'm going to live my life, not yours." There was no address, no apology, only departure. Takashi's heart splintered like dry bamboo under force. He didn't speak for weeks. He stopped making flutes. He stopped laughing. Over the years, his bitterness hardened into routine. Each morning, he sat beside the stream behind the house, carving his fingers into grooves of work. The villagers pitied him but never disturbed him. The monk from Ryosan Temple once offered prayers, but Takashi only nodded in silence. Years passed, like wind through reeds then, one spring morning, as cherry blossoms danced over the rooftops, a stranger arrived at Senki. He wore a long brown robe, a shaved head, and sandals coated in the dust of many roads. His name was Ryota, a young monk on pilgrimage. He had heard of Takashi's craftsmanship and came to study the deeper meaning of bamboo from the old master. Takashi barely glanced up when Ryota knocked at his door. "There's nothing here for monks or merchants," he said. "I'm not here to buy," Ryota replied gently. "I'm here to learn." Takashi paused. There was something in the monk's tone and emptiness that mirrored his own. With a grunt, he stepped aside. For 3 months, Ryota stayed. He swept the workshop, tended to the garden, and quietly observed Takashi's every movement. When Takashi split bamboo, Ryota listened to the sound. When he soaked the cane in spring water, Ryota watched the reflections. The silence between them was not awkward, but slowly softened. One evening, under the orange haze of sunset, Ryota asked, "Why do you no longer make flutes?" Takashi didn't answer. Instead, he handed Ryota a piece of bamboo and said, "Make one." Ryota fumbled, cracking the surface. The next one bent too sharply. The third split clean, but the tone hole was misaligned. Takashi watched in silence, then finally took the last flute in hand. He placed it to his lips and played a single note. It was out of tune. "You can follow the shape," Takashi muttered, "but unless your heart is still, the sound will never be right." That night, Ryota sat beside the fire and said softly, "Forgiveness is like bamboo, isn't it? It must bend in wind. If it stands too rigid, it breaks." Takashi stirred the coals, eyes heavy. "My son left me. I will never forgive him. But you teach me bamboo bends," Ryota replied. Shouldn't the heart bend too? Silence that the following morning, Ryota packed to leave. You've given me more than bamboo, he bowed. You've shown me the weight of silence. As he turned to walk down the path, he placed a small scroll on Takashi's bench. That evening, Takashi opened it. It read, "Father, I was foolish. I thought the world would shape me, but it broke me. I have wandered and wept and wished to return 1,000 times, but I feared you would never forgive me. If this letter ever finds you, I hope one day, like the bamboo you love, your heart might bend enough to remember the sound of my voice." Hiro Takashi stared at the words for hours. Then he walked to the stream and stood in silence. His hands trembled. The cicadas had begun their evening song. In his workshop, he found an old piece of madik bamboo he had saved years ago. Dick, aged perfect. All night he worked. He soaked it in spring water. He steamed it slowly over the fire. He shaped the mouthpiece with tender hands. He polished the nodes. Then, carefully, he carved the tone holes, each with the precision of a prayer. When the flute was complete, he sat beneath the moonlight and raised it to his lips. A single note flowed clear, deep, trembling with memory. It was not perfect, but it was honest. The next morning, villagers found a note on the temple steps addressed to Ryota, the monk. It read, "Come back when you can. There's still much to teach you. Bring someone with you if you find him." From that day forward, the villagers noticed the old man changed. He smiled more. He made flutes again, and every evening a song of bamboo floated from his workshop into the valley, where the wind carried it far across the mountains, perhaps even to Tokyo. Zen parable. Student asked the master, "How can I forgive someone who wounded me?" The master led him to a grove of bamboo. "Strike it," the master said. The student did, and the bamboo bent. "Strike harder," it bent again. Once more, the bamboo snapped. The master said, "The heart that never bends will eventually break." Philosophical reflection. Forgiveness is not the erasure of pain, nor the denial of hurt. It is the quiet willingness to make room for grace. Like bamboo, we must learn when to yield, not from weakness, but from wisdom. The rigidity of resentment hardens into isolation, but the bending of the heart opens the path for reunion, healing, and growth. Psychological insight. Modern psychology echoes this lesson. Forgiveness is not about condoning harm, but liberating the self from the prison of anger. When Takashi clung to his grief, he silenced his own voice. Only when he allowed himself to soften, to remember love rather than betrayal, did he begin to heal. Forgiveness is a tool not just for relationships, but for self-repair, meditative. Close your eyes. Visualize a bamboo grove swaying gently in the breeze. Breathe in the stillness. Breathe out the burdens. Ask yourself, where in my heart have I remained rigid? Whom must I forgive not for their sake, but for my own? Peace. Even a broken flute can play again if the heart dares to breathe through it. Story 21. The wind that knows no name. The old monastery stood at the edge of a cliff where the mountains kissed the sky, and the wind was the only thing that moved freely between heaven and earth. It was in this place, where silence hung like a prayer and even time walked barefoot, that Master Renbo took in a strange new disciple. His name was Arun, a boy with no past and no memory. They had found him by the riverbank during the first frost, barely breathing, eyes open but empty as if his soul had not yet arrived. He could not speak a word, nor remember who he was, but Master Renbo with the calm of one who has seen many. Things come and go, simply said, then let the wind name you. From that day forward, Arun was called Kazuo, meaning harmonious man. Though the monks often whispered he was more like the wind than man-untethered, elusive, impossible to contain. Kazuo never asked questions, not because he was obedient, but because the world, as it was, seemed enough. He would wake before the morning bell, sweep the stone steps before anyone stirred, and sit for hours in the garden without moving. Birds would perch on his shoulders, deer wandered close, and even the wild dogs of the mountain would bow before him and leave. The other disciples were curious. They gossiped in hushed voices about his origins. Some said he had been cursed, others that he was born of spirits. But Master Renbo would only smile and say, "The wind does not owe you its reasons." As months turned to years, Kazuo never aged in the same way others did. His face remained as youthful as when he arrived, his eyes deeper than memory. He meditated with the focus of a stone, and when he walked, he left no footprints. But one evening, something shifted. It was during the Festival of Lanterns. Candles floated down the river like stars released from heaven, and the monks sang sutras beneath a sky bright with moonlight. A traveler arrived, a woman cloaked in black, her face veiled, her footsteps uncertain. She asked for shelter, and Master Renbo, as always, offered it without hesitation. That night, Kazuo did not sleep. He stood by the window of the meditation hall, watching the guest quarters across the garden. The wind carried whispers he could not decipher, but they made his chest ache, as though a forgotten memory were pressing against the locked door of his mind. The woman stayed for 3 days. She never removed her veil, and she spoke little, but each time she passed Kazuo, she paused, as if recognizing a shadow she once knew. On the 3rd night, she came to the garden where Kazuo sat beneath the plum tree. "I once had a son," she said softly, kneeling beside him. He disappeared in the storm. Kazuo did not answer. His hands were still. His eyes were wide. The wind stopped. "He had a birthmark," she continued, "shaped like the crescent moon just behind his left ear." Silently, Kazuo turned his head, and there it was. The woman began to cry, not loudly, but as if the rain itself had wept through her eyes. Kazuo did not speak, did not weep. He simply closed his eyes. When Master Renbo was told, he only nodded. Even the wind must return home one day. The next morning, the woman and Kazuo prepared to leave. The other disciples gathered to bid farewell, confused and silent. But before he left, Kazuo bowed before Master Renbo and asked his first question, "Who am I?" The old master looked at him for a long time. "You are what remains when nothing is left." Kazuo didn't understand then, but he bowed deeply and walked away with the woman. Years passed. The monastery fell into disrepair after Master Renbo passed on, and the disciples scattered like leaves in autumn wind. But legends remained. People spoke of a healer who roamed the villages, never staying in one place. He wore robes of ash and sky, carried no money, and asked only for a place to sleep. He would appear when a child was dying or an old man had forgotten how to smile. He would stay the night, touch their hands, and whisper something only the soul could understand. Then he would leave before dawn. Some said he was a bodhisattva. Others believed he was a ghost. But the old villagers had a simpler name. They called him the wind that knows no name. Years later, in a village far south where the sea sang endlessly to the rocks, an old monk lay dying. He opened his eyes one last time and smiled at the boy sitting by his bed. "You've come," he whispered. The boy till now, his hair streaked with grey, took the monk's hand. "I remembered," he said, and with that the monk closed his eyes, a tear running down his cheek like a prayer fulfilled. Kazuo stayed with the village until spring. He built a garden by the sea, planted plum trees, and taught children to sit still and listen to the silence. He never told them his name. One evening, as the cherry blossoms fell like snow, he sat beneath a tree, closed his eyes, and breathed his last. The wind rose suddenly, fierce and joyful, sweeping through the village like a hymn. And then it was gone, only the silence remained. But in the years that followed, the children would sometimes stop playing, look to the mountains, and say, "Did you hear that? What? The wind? It whispered something. What did it say?" And always the answer was the same. It said, "Remember." Story 22. The sound of the last drop. The monk, Ryan, had always listened more than he had spoken. In the tranquil mountain monastery of Ishinji, where clouds touched the tops of pines and streams threaded through mossy stones, his silence was not an absence but a presence. Novices found him austere, the villagers called him the quiet bell, and the other monks regarded him with both reverence and mystery. He had been at the temple longer than anyone could recall, and though many came and left, he remained, sweeping the leaves, tending to the old stone lanterns, and sitting long hours in meditation. One early winter morning, Ryan received a letter. It arrived through the hands of a breathless villager who had climbed the path before sunrise. The letter was wrapped in old silk and bore the crest of the Kanamura family, a name from a world Ryan had left behind decades ago. He unfolded it slowly. "Your brother is dying," it read. "He calls your name in sleep. Please come." There was no signature, only the address of a home he had once known. Many lifetimes ago, Ryan stared at the ink for a long time. Then, without a word, he folded the letter and placed it inside his robe. The abbot watched him from across the courtyard. "You will go," he said, simply. Ryan bowed. 2 days later, he descended the mountain for the first time in 33 years. The city had changed. Electric wires crisscrossed the sky, neon signs flickered above alleys, and the hum of life drowned the sound of thought. Ryan walked without reacting, his old robes drawing glances and whispers. He reached the district of his birth near dusk, a neighborhood once grand, now worn by time, at the gate of the Kanamura residence. He paused. The house, though faded, stood as it had before, stone lions guarding the entrance, a crooked pine still clinging to the courtyard. A young woman answered his knock. She looked startled, then bowed deeply. "I am Emi," she said. "He's waiting for you." Inside, the air smelled of old cedar and distant memories. Ryan followed her to a room lit only by paper lamps. On the futon lay a man with sunken cheeks and eyes that fluttered open with effort. "Ryo." The voice cracked. "Yes, brother." The sick man, Hiroto, wept. Not dramatically, but as if his body remembered something his mind could no longer name. They had not spoken since their father's funeral, after which Ryan had vanished. "Into the mountains. I wronged you," Hiroto whispered. "All my life, I carried it like a stone tied to my soul." Ryan did not reply. "You were right to leave," Hiroto said. "But wrong. Wrong not to return." Ryan sat beside him. He took a cloth and gently wiped the man's brow. "I thought you'd hate me," Hiroto said, "after what I did, after father's will, after at the mention of her name." Ryan's hand paused for a moment, then continued. "I had been the stillness between them, the woman both brothers loved, though only one married her. When she died in childbirth, both men drifted in opposite directions, Hiroto into sorrow and drink, Ryan into silence and mountains. I have no hatred, Ryan said softly, only stillness. A long quiet filled the room, the kind that no city noise could breach. I want to be free, Hiroto whispered, but the past clings like dust. There is a way, Ryan said, but it's not easy. He began to chant softly, a mantra his teacher once gave him, not as a spell of release, but of recognition. As the sound vibrated through the air, Hiroto's eyes closed. Not in sleep, but as though listening to something far beyond the walls. That night, Ryan stayed by his brother's side. EMI brought tea and asked gently, "Will he live?" Ryan looked at her with eyes like still ponds. "He will die, but perhaps he will wake before he does." Before dawn, Hiroto stirred again. His voice, though faint, was steady. "I see it. Now," he said, "all the anger, the pride, the endless wanting, it was noise, and beneath it was always you, silent, waiting." Ryan leaned close. "Not me, brother, yourself." Hiroto smiled. It was the smile of a boy who had once watched clouds with his younger sibling from the rooftop, pointing out dragons and cranes in the sky. The smile faded as his breath slowed. At the moment the sun's first light touched the room, Hiroto exhaled one final time. It was not dramatic. No gasp, no cry, only a sigh, like wind through bamboo, and then silence. A week later, Ryan prepared to return to Isinji. Before leaving, he sat in the garden where Ayam once tended lilies. Ime approached, her hands folded. "I found something," she said, handing him a small lacquered box. Inside was a letter, addressed to Ryan, dated 25 years ago. He read it slowly. "In my dreams, you still sit beside the stream where we used to wash fruit. I wanted to tell you then, I always knew, about Hiroto, about me. I chose peace, but I never forgot. You, if this reaches you, let it be known. My love did not die. It only changed form. There was no signature, just a drawing of a mountain beneath a moon." Ryan closed the box gently. He did not weep, but as he looked up at the morning sky, a single drop of rain touched his cheek. Or perhaps it was something else. That evening, back at Ishinji, Ryan resumed his seat in the meditation hall. The wind passed through the open windows, carrying the faintest scent of old pine and incense. A novice asked him later, "Master, when does one know they have forgiven?" Ryan opened his eyes and said, "When the sound of the last drop no longer ripples the pond." And with that he rang the bell for evening zazen. The sound, though soft, seemed to echo across time. Story 23. The silence between the notes. The village of Ked had always moved to a rhythm older than memory, tucked between gently sloping hills and forests thick with cedar and pine. The place was neither hurried by the seasons nor burdened by ambition. It was there, in a thatched roof house near the edge of the forest, that Aika lived in solitude. She had arrived 5 years ago, bringing nothing but a small bundle of clothes and a flute wrapped in silk dot. No one in the village asked about her past, not out of disinterest, but out of quiet respect. They sensed something delicate in her, like a paper lantern flickering in the wind. Aika worked in the herb gardens of old widow Matsu, and she played her flute at dusk each note, carrying a sorrow too refined to name. Children, curious and bold, would sometimes tiptoe to the edges of her garden to hear her play. The villagers, though respectful of her silence, often paused in their evening chores when the music drifted through the air, as if the melody itself were part of the wind's design. One spring evening, a traveling monk arrived. His robe was dusty, his sandals worn, and his gaze steady. He introduced himself as Sagan and asked to stay at the temple for a few nights. He walked the village paths during the day, speaking little but observing deeply. When he heard Aka's flute for the first time, he stopped in his tracks. After 3 evenings, he approached her garden. He bowed low, hands folded before him. "Your music," he said softly, "is like listening to the space between the falling petals of plum blossoms." Aka blinked. No one had ever spoken of her music like that, not with such precision. "It is not the notes themselves," Sogan continued, "but the silences between them that speak the most." She tilted her head. "You hear the silence." "I do. It is the most honest part of the song." Thus began an odd companionship. He would sit near the bamboo fence while she tended her herbs or played her flute. They rarely spoke, but their silences grew fertile. One day she finally asked, "Do you always speak like a monk in a riddle?" Sogan chuckled, a deep sound like river stones tumbling. "Only when I listen like one." It was not long before Ika shared her story. She had been the daughter of a renowned court musician. Her life in the capital had once been filled with music, opulence, and pressure. At age 19, she fell in love with a fellow cellist with dreams larger than their shared life. When he left her for a royal patroness, Aka was devastated. Her father, enraged by the scandal, forced her to perform at a royal banquet while tears streamed silently down her cheeks. That night, she left everything behind. "I learned that sound can betray," she told Sargon, "but silence has never lied to me." Sogan listened, his eyes still. "Then why do you play?" he finally asked. She looked down at her flute. "Because in playing, I find the courage to return to the silence again." The monk nodded slowly. "In Zen, there is a saying, the truth is in the pause, not the phrase." Spring turned to summer, and Sogan stayed longer than planned. One evening, the children of the village asked Aka to play for the midsummer festival. She hesitated. Performing for herself was one thing. Performing for others reopened wounds. Sogen, seeing her conflict, said, "There are 2 kinds of silence, one that hides and one that reveals. You must choose which yours has become." She agreed to perform, but only under the old cedar tree, away from the main square. When night fell, lanterns glowed softly across the village. The villagers gathered near the tree, and Aka stood, flute in hand. Beneath a moon filtered through leaves. She began to play. At first her hands trembled, but the first few notes rose like mist over morning rice fields. Then came the silences, breath after breath, pause after pause. She played not to be heard, but to be emptied. The villagers listened, not moving, not breathing too deeply, as if they feared breaking whatever spell she was weaving. When she finished, she did not bow. She only lowered her flute and looked up at the stars. No applause, followed only stillness, reverence. It was enough. Sogan approached. "You played the silence." "I did," she said, "and for the first time, it played me back." Later, that summer, Sogan prepared to leave. He had stayed far longer than he intended. Aka walked him to the village gate. "You never asked me to forgive him," she said. "I never needed to," he replied. "You already forgave yourself." She smiled. He handed her a folded piece of parchment. Inside was a Zen koan. A student asked the master, What is the sound of one hand clapping? The master raised a finger to his lips and closed his eyes. Acre watched him walk away, his form growing smaller among the cedar trees. Years passed. The children who once tiptoed around her garden grew into adults. Acre remained in Ked, teaching music not by technique but by presence. Her students learned not only how to play but how to listen to themselves, to others, and to the silence, waiting between all things. And each night, as the wind moved gently through the pine needles, the sound of her flute would rise not as a song of pain, nor a declaration of skill, but as a breath within the breath of the universe, a sound that needed no explanation, because in its silences everything was already known. Story 24. The whisper beneath the Belther village of Canberra was known not for its grandeur or industry, but for its stillness. The air hung low and soft, and when the wind blew, it whispered instead of howled. Tucked beneath the shadow of Mount Asahi, it was a place where time seemed to unravel like thread from an old monk's robe, patiently and without resistance. In the heart of the village stood a bell tower, tall and wooden, aged by wind and prayer. The bell itself, cast in bronze with ancient script etched along its rim, had not rung for over 20 years. Some said the metal was cracked, others believed the silence was an act of reverence. But the real reason was known only to a few. The monk who once rang it had vanished. Master Schwen had been the keeper of the bell, a gentle man with eyes like melted obsidian, clear and dark. He lived in a small thatched hut behind the temple, spending his days teaching children, sweeping leaves, and meditating before sunrise. He was beloved not just for his wisdom, but for his ability to hear silence as though it were a song. One day, as dusk settled like ash, a traveler named Riku came to the village. His boots were coated in mountain dust, and his eyes carried a storm. He asked no questions, offered no greetings, and carried with him only a cloth-wrapped bundle and a scroll tucked into his belt. He spent the night at the inn. Though he did not eat, he stared at the ceiling and whispered in his sleep. The innkeeper's daughter, curious and bold, peeked at his bundle while he bathed. Inside, she saw a small iron hammer and a wooden mallet carved with Sanskrit markings. The next morning, Riku made his way to the bell tower. He stood before the silent bronze structure, head bowed, hands clenched. Villagers gathered at a distance, whispers blooming like weeds. Riku placed the hammer and mallet on the stone platform and sat in sesa, unmoving for hours. When the sun reached its zenith, the old abbot emerged from the temple, his bones brittle, but his voice steady. "You've come for the bell," he said. Riku nodded. "I've come to wake it. It does not wish to be woken. No bell wishes or refuses. It rings when struck." The abbot sighed. "You carry your past like a blade. You intend to carve peace from it, but the blade may cut you first. Was told the bell sings the truth. I must hear it." The abbot gestured toward the temple. "Then you must listen first." That evening, Riku entered the temple. He placed his mallet before the altar and sat opposite the abbot. The incense curled, like smoke from an unseen fire. No words passed between them. Hours fell like leaves. Finally, the abbot asked, "What truth do you seek?" Riku's voice trembled. "I seek release from guilt." "What have you done?" "I killed a man, a monk. 20 years ago." The temple dimmed. The silence thickened. The abbot closed. His eyes tell me. Riku's story came slowly, as though each word bore a chain. He had been a bandit, young and angry, robbing temples and travelers alike. One winter's night, his group came upon Canberra. Master Schwen opened the temple to them, offered food, warmth, even blessing. But Riku, drunk on ego and greed, had demanded the temple's golden statues. When Schwen refused, Riku struck him. Down. Or so he believed. There was no blood, he whispered. Only his body, still as the bell. We buried him by the river. I left the group that night. For years I wandered, tormented. And then, one day, I heard a legend, that the bell of Canberra speaks the truth to those who listen. I have come to know what became of him. If he died with hate in his heart, I will never find peace. The abbot opened his eyes. The bell does not speak in words. I'm ready for its silence, too. The next morning, Riku stood before the bell. He took the mallet and whispered a prayer, not to be forgiven, but to be seen as he truly was. Then, with one fluid motion, he struck the bell. The sound rolled through the valley like thunder wrapped in silk. It echoed through the trees, into the river, over the mountain. Birds took flight, and even the leaves seemed to pause. The villagers stood frozen, but Riku heard something more, not just the sound, but the gap within it, a breath between echoes. The stillness inside the storm, and there, in that sliver of nothing, he heard a whisper, not a word, not even a voice, but the unmistakable presence of grace. He fell to his knees, weeping not from grief, but from recognition. The sound had not condemned him, it had not absolved him, it had shown him what already was. The bell had never been silent, he had simply not listened. That night, Riku remained by the bell. The villagers brought him food and lanterns. Children sat beside him, asking him stories of places he had seen. He spoke gently, no longer with storm, but with sky. The abbot joined him by midnight. I saw Master Schwen once after that night, he said. He walked into the forest alone, never to return. But he was not angry, he said. Even those who wound us carve a path to their own salvation. If I vanish, let the bell speak for me. Riku looked up at the stars. Then I've heard his voice at last. The abbot nodded, and what did it say? That I am not who I was, that forgiveness is not a pardon, but a mirror, and that the truth ... is always quiet. The bell tower remained ... years passed. Riku stayed, becoming a gardener, then a teacher, and finally, a monk. When he died, the bell rang again, struck by a child who had never known war. Only the patience of an old man who once carried a storm, and in the valley. When the wind passed through the trees, it sounded like a whisper beneath. A bell. Story 25. The garden behind the Wallin. The outskirts of a village nestled between pale jade mountains and windswept rice paddies. There stood an old house with a wall higher than any man's reach. The villagers whispered about the man who lived. There he was once a scholar, then a recluse, and finally nothing. Some said he had gone mad. Others believed he was chasing the silence the world refused to give. The house was old, the kind that looked like it had lived through storms and births, weddings, and funerals. Its clay tiles were darkened by rain, and moss had conquered the stone steps. What drew curiosity most wasn't the man, but the wall. No one had seen what was behind it. One spring, a young monk named Jun arrived at the village on a journey of pilgrimage and self-study. His master had sent him to learn not from books or temples, but from silence, wind, people, and the way suffering carves the heart. Jun heard the stories of the house, the man, and the mysterious wall. Unlike the villagers, he wasn't afraid. He knocked on the gate. Gently, there was no answer. He sat by the wall, waiting as cherry blossoms fell like snowflakes. The second day, he knocked again. Still silence. But on the third day, a voice rasped from behind the gate. "What do you want?" Jun bowed, even though the man could not see it. To listen, there was a pause. A crow called in the distance. The voice returned. "Then listen to your own silence. There's nothing here. For you." But Jun remained, not leaving, not speaking. That evening, a wooden bowl of rice appeared outside the gate. Days passed. Jun continued to sit under the plum tree by the wall. At dawn, he would meditate. At dusk, he would offer words, not of preaching, but of honest inquiry. "Do you believe a man can become a stone?" One morning, the gate creaked. It opened a crack. "You may enter, but only to the garden." Jun stepped inside. Behind the wall was not what he expected. It was not overgrown with weeds or wild vines. Instead, it was a garden of infinite care. Every stone was placed with intention, every tree pruned with reverence. It was a sanctuary, but no temple. A koi pond shimmered at the center, its water perfectly still. The old man stood there, his back bent, hair white, face carved like bark from years of weather. He did not smile. "Do not speak," he said. "Let the garden speak first." Jun nodded and walked among the paths. Time slowed. The world hushed. Days became weeks. Jun returned. Every morning, walk in the garden in silence. The old man never shared his name, nor asked Chen's. But slowly, he began to speak not in stories, but fragments. "I buried my wife beneath the willow. She sang to me in the rain. I once thought knowledge could save a soul, and—" Jun listened, never forcing questions, only offering presence. One evening, the man brought out an old calligraphy scroll. He unrolled it before the pond. It read, "Beneath silence, the wound speaks. Within the wound, the lotus blooms." Jun bowed. "Did you write this?" The man's voice trembled. "No, my daughter did." It was the first time Jun saw tears in the old man's eyes. "I taught her every poem I knew. I taught her that logic could tame life's cruelty. I taught her how to write, how to read, how to argue, but I never taught her how to forgive herself." He paused. "She took her life one autumn morning. She left this scroll behind. I built this wall the next day." Jun sat beside him. "Why a wall?" The man looked toward the setting sun. "So no more words could get in or out." Jun closed his eyes. The wind stirred. That night, the old man invited him to stay. They shared rice, salted radish, and a single candle's light. The man spoke of his youth as a professor, the accolades, the debates, the way his mind once glittered with certainty, and how, when grief came, none of it helped. "I tried to outthink sorrow, but grief is not an equation. It is a cone with—" "No answer," Jun whispered. "Then what do we do?" The old man closed his eyes. "We garden." And so Jun began helping tend the sanctuary. They raked the gravel, pruned the bamboo, listened to frogs croaking at night. They spoke of nothing and everything. It was not therapy, not ritual, but presence. One morning, Jun found a cracked teacup on the edge of the koi pond. The man saw him staring and said, "She used to drink from that. I keep it there to remind me, things break, but they can still reflect the sky." Weeks later, Jun knew his time had come. He had to continue his pilgrimage. On his final morning, he asked the man a question he had never dared ask. Do you believe your daughter forgives you? The old man looked long at the garden, his fingers trembling. I don't know, he said, but perhaps forgiveness is not something to grasp. Perhaps it is something to become. Jun bowed. And do you forgive yourself? The man closed his eyes, then opened them. Not yet, he said, but I am learning. The wall remains, but inside it, I have made space for birds to fly. John smiled as he walked away from the house. He did not look back. The gate closed behind him, but the silence it carried was no longer sorrowful. It was the silence of still water, where a lotus had begun to bloom. Zen parable interlude. The broken Kape monk once asked the master, "Why do we suffer when the cup breaks?" The master lifted a small porcelain teacup. "This cup is already broken." The student frowned, "But it's not." The master replied, "In knowing its end, I cherish its now." The student wept without knowing why. Philosophical reflection. The wall we build around pain is never just to keep others out, it is often to keep ourselves from looking in. In the story, the old man represents the intellect that tries to rationalize grief. His garden is not merely a metaphor for healing, but for awareness, the deliberate cultivation of presence in the face of loss. The presence of the young monk does not break the wall with logic or arguments. He enters through silence and remains. Through patience. Healing, like gardening, is an act of faith over time. And the cracked teacup, a reminder that we do not need to repair all things. Some things are beautiful in their brokenness, especially when they reflect the sky. Psychological reflection. Grief, unprocessed, becomes isolation. The old man is a case of melancholic withdrawal, where intellectual defenses suppress the vulnerability of raw emotion. When he begins to share, not in grand narratives, but in fragments, we witness a slow reintegration of his emotional self. Chen's method mirrors humanistic psychology, presence, empathy, and unconditional regard. He does not push the man to confess or reform, but offers relational space. The garden, therefore, becomes a symbolic and literal container for emotional healing structure, attention, and life. The concept of the already broken cup is psychologically potent. It encourages radical acceptance, not in nihilism, but in cherishing impermanence. It is a teaching in mindfulness, groundedness, and compassion for others and oneself. Meditative closing. Sit. For a moment, close your eyes. Think of the wall you have built not just to keep pain out, but to avoid seeing what remains inside. Now imagine a single gate, who is sitting outside that gate, waiting not to challenge you, but simply to listen. Breathe. What does your garden look like? Can you forgive the wound, not by erasing it, but by planting something within it? Repeat gently, I am learning to forgive, not to forget, but to remember with peace. Let this be your silence today. Let it bloom. As we gently close the final chapter of this journey through 25 Zen healing stories, I invite you to pause and reflect on what has stirred within you. Which story lingered in your thoughts? Which lesson touched a quiet part of your soul? Each tale was shared not only as a whisper of ancient wisdom, but as an offering of peace for the moments you need it most. If these stories have brought calm, clarity, or a shift in your heart, I warmly encourage you to share your thoughts in the comments. Let us know what resonated with you. Your reflections may light the path for someone else who finds their way here. And if you found value in this space, in the stillness between words, the silence that teaches, I gently ask you to support this growing sanctuary by liking this video, subscribing to The Empty Boat, and sharing it with someone who may need to drift into these waters, to thank you for sailing with us on this quiet voyage. Until we meet again, may you carry the stillness within, like an empty boat, moving freely with the rhythm of life.